Oh, okay. No, it's great. It's great.
I forgot who he was. Because I didn't realize I'd be running into him again.
No, I mean,
So I
I
introduced
don't know.
myself to him in the soccer team, and I was like, "Hi, my name's Samir. What's your name? Santosh. What's the name?"
People said that.
Okay.
I'm an Aries.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Santosh.
Oh,
Similar to Santosh. I think it's Santosh.
Alicia Blackwell.
Oh, really?
And
This poem, man.
He's on your team.
he's on my team, and he didn't tell me.
Right after.
So then I looked him up on WhatsApp afterwards, and I looked him up on Facebook, and I was like, "That's Shanta's brother."
Okay, I'll take a look at it.
The one
We
we
talk history.
Yeah.
but that's right after Damnation of Woman. And
Right
before-
after,
before-
I hope you didn't take my text message.
We're live.
You know what? No, I didn't because
Hey guys, we're live and we'll get started.
really.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry.
No. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So today we're going to talk about the current crisis in the American state and really talk about the world situation with the ceasefire in Gaza and the ongoing shutdown. And we're going to have a real discussion on the crisis, and then we'll talk about the role of art and the role of Black art in the struggle to remake the American people. So let's start to begin the discussion.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And Seraphine and I will talk about art, Black art, and the question of remaking the people and the nation. But first, as you know, the world and the nation, this nation, are beset by crisis after crisis. That's not saying anything new. I don't know where to begin, but I guess I'll begin with the government shutdown. It is part of the crisis of can the country be governed? But there's something deeper, and I like to call it the hidden or untold or yet told story of the government shutdown. It is a manifestation of the crises, and we talked about 5 pillars of it. The first 2 are deindustrialization and the cost of empire. Deindustrialization has, not just since Trump, but over the last 40 years, made the government poorer and thus made borrowing more necessary. Deindustrialization, of course, has made the people, the American people, poor. We don't have to go over that. We've talked about that so much. But then it's made more wealthy and created perhaps a class the likes of which humanity has never seen, an overlord class of bankers, investors, financiers, hedge funds, money marketers, money changers. And over the last 40 years, this has been a game changer. The U.S. economic structure is unlike anything we've ever seen. And this is why it's become normal to talk about multi-billionaires, individuals, now trillionaires, in the midst of homelessness, poverty, urban decay, the decline of the infrastructure. We could go on and on. We see it every day. It was the social democrat, the German social democrat, Rudolf Hilferding, who first drew attention to this in his book, Finance Capital, which, you don't have to read, but it's a marker for the intellectual and political recognition that something different and qualitatively different had happened in capitalism at the end of the 19th century. You gotta get, I'm sorry. She's supposed to be at work.
Oh my gosh,
A marker for a change, a qualitative change in capitalism, from the dominance, as he saw the dominance of industrial capitalism to the dominance of what he called finance capital. Lenin built upon Hilferding in his book Imperialism and said that this was the final stage of capitalism. And I guess all of us thought that since it was the final stage, it was on its deathbed, and it turned out that it really wasn't. But anyway, Lenin and Hilferding provide a way of thinking about a stage of capitalism where the theories, for example, of classical political economy, from Adam Smith to Marx, and I guess even John Maynard Keynes, did not fully address what capitalism had become. We see these, just so, the headlines about stock market going up, the S&P, which deals with tech stocks, all going up to historic highs. But one thing that they talk about, but it's the most uncomfortable thing, is what are the bond markets doing? How much is it costing the United States, especially the government, to borrow money? That's what kind of slowed Trump's Liberation Day announcement down, when the cost of financing and borrowing to keep the American government, really the American state, in business. This is hugely important because if the state cannot hold, if the cost of the functioning of the state is so much that it imperils the empire's existence. Does that make sense the way I put
can
that?
you say it one more
And
time?
the U.S. state, we always talk about the U.S. government, it's really the U.S. state. If the cost of its functioning as the pivotal, decisive mechanism of the American empire and American war capacity, if it becomes too costly, it imperils the capacity to maintain the U.S. empire. And by U.S. empire, we're not talking about the British Empire, we're not talking about occupying India or Nigeria, any of that type of thing. We are talking about the capacity to control the world economy and to decide through its so-called rules-based system, winners and losers, what economies survive and which ones don't, and which nations, if they get out of line, will have to face the U.S. military and economic sanctions. If the state cannot hold, all of this is in peril. Does that make sense? I mention this because to me, this is the hidden history of the current shutdown and previous shutdowns. It is not a question of Obamacare and the cost of health care. It is the fight over whether or not the state can financially, can it pay its bills? Can it exist? And we could look back to previous revolutions. Let us not forget the French Revolution began over the question of the French state becoming indebted to the extent that it had to, through inflation and other means, taxation, pass on the burden of the state to the ordinary citizen. We see that now. I don't know if I should go into too much, but you get the architecture. It's not what they're saying, and pretty much it's not what most of the members of the Senate and the House of Representatives think it is. It's something far more profound and far more representative of a deeper crisis. Of course, the two parties are so far apart, and unlike France, which is in a similar situation, but with a different political system, a different way of doing politics. So they have multiple parties, and the possibility of compromise is greater, or the system's predisposed to compromise. Here, with two parties in this deeply divided country, the possibilities of compromise are more difficult, and the system is less predisposed to that. So they can't, but then it is a question which is not fully addressed of can the nation afford both empire and a social contract with the people, as minuscule as it is, like basics like health care for the poor or hospitals? Or is this too expensive? Does the state which is actually, the state of the empire, does it so imperil its existence by this huge $37 trillion sovereign debt? Okay? I think what we're looking at, although not said at all, and probably intentionally not spoken about, we're looking at a crisis of the cost of empire. That's the only way you make sense of this. Now, you kind of pick it up from this guy, Russell Vought, a major player. Like they said, he went from working in the mailroom of the Senate to now the co-president. But this always happens in crisis, where all kinds of opportunists and fools and clowns rise to the apex of power. You know what I'm saying? And you become influential and powerful in the Trump administration by bowing down, praising him, and telling him he's right about everything. I'm going to return to him because he's a part of the whole thing, obviously. But the government shutdown, without saying more, is a manifestation and reflection of the crisis of empire and financing it. The right, so-called, what is the right, what is the left? I mean, those terms don't mean a great deal these days. The right, as it is called, the Russell votes in this kind of situation, what they're saying is, in the interest of empire, we have to jettison the welfare state, the New Deal reforms, even Obamacare. To make America great again is really about empire. We'll come back to that. Well, just one other thing. Historians, who look at the long view of things, have assessed or said that when the interest on the sovereign debt exceeds the amount spent on the military, it is a manifestation of a crisis of the state and of empire. Okay? Mm-hmm. The interest on this $37 trillion exceeds what is spent on the military. And I'm not praising the military, I'm just saying. Last thing, a similar crisis exists in France. They have a very different system. You know, the president is almost like a king. Macron is like a king. And that they can't put a government together or hold the government in place for anything more than a couple of months. But then let's go to Ukraine. You know, the headlines said yesterday that Trump is not going to give Ukraine Tomahawk missiles. It's nothing to celebrate because we know that the deal is after Trump and Putin meet in Budapest, I think next week or the week after, and if Putin doesn't back down, he's going to give these missiles to Ukraine. He's really not giving them to Ukraine. These are missiles that will have to be operated by Americans on Ukrainian soil. They are missiles that are designed to carry nuclear weapons, nuclear bombs. You know, I listen to Alexander Mercurius all the time. Oh, they're not going to change anything on the ground. That's not the point. The point is, are these missiles symbolic of a red line that says at this point the United States is a direct participant in the war in the Ukraine, and that these same missiles could also be put in NATO countries near to Ukraine, and that by giving these missiles and others like them to Ukraine, you are encouraging Ukraine to strike deep into Russia, which now creates a new level of the conflict itself. So Mercurius, who is always, well, it's not going to change anything on the ground, and the special military operation is going for. Well, I think we've crossed the Rubicon with even the discussion of such weapons, rather than a discussion of a negotiated peace that takes into account Russia's security interests in Ukraine and beyond. If this is Trump's response, then Trump is saying not only is he a nuclear brinksman, which is to say bringing Europe in particular to the brink of nuclear war, if not openly suggesting an all-out war, which would mean nuclear weapons in Europe. I want to come back to Trump, okay? You know, I always say I'm going to stop listening to too many podcasts. Well, I'm back to listening to podcasts. I can't, so. Because I'd just like to draw y'all's attention to Gilbert Doctorow on Glenn Deason's podcast. I highly recommend to you all to listen to it, and to listen carefully and maybe more than once. Doctorow, Gilbert Doctorow, who lives in Brussels, a Russian speaker and an analyst, political analyst, recently wrote an article which he and Glenn Deason discussed a day or so ago. In the article, he's looking at this tomahawk, giving tomahawks to the Ukrainians. Frankly, not to Ukraine, placing tomahawks in Ukraine, operated by U.S. military or civilian technicians. He is saying that Trump is saying to Putin, either you back down or it's all out war. What Dr. O is saying is that Putin has to SHIT or get up off the pot. He has to stop bullshitting. He is saying, and you guys listen to it, it's not a, it's not Mercurius, where everything gonna work out and, Putin knows what he's doing and it takes Mercurius an hour and a half to tell you that. But Dr. Rose says that Putin must go now from the special military operation to all-out war with Ukraine. That short of that, Putin's go slow incrementalism only invites further belligerency and militarization of Ukraine and of Europe. That you cannot wait until 2028, 2029 for Europe to remilitarize itself and to Russia to expend a great part of its capacity while Europe gets stronger, while the United States arms Europe with Tomahawks and other nuclear capable missiles. He says the only way to avoid that is to declare war on Ukraine and not a special military operation, and recognize, and Putin must recognize, that Trump is not your friend, that you have not played him, that he is playing you, that Trump says one thing to you when he intends to do the very opposite. Dr. Rose says that in all-out war, the first thing that must be done is that Kiev must be totally destroyed. And I mean, he speaks in, frankly, he talks the way I like to hear somebody talk. I mean, rather than McCoy, all this, I'm droning. He skips right to the point. He says, we're beyond the Rubicon. Kiev must be destroyed. Its government buildings, and these are his words, must be destroyed in broad daylight during the day, so the people that work in those buildings are also killed, and that at the end, Kiev looks like Gaza. That the regime in Kiev must be totally destroyed. You cannot allow these people to continue, I'm speaking in his language, you cannot allow these people to continue to walk around while they go into Russia, kill Russian officials, send missiles to destroy critical parts of the Russian energy system, and even have targeted Putin himself for decapitation. He says that has to end. And his argument is that the Russian governmental leadership is divided at this point. That you probably heard of Dmitry Medvedev. He was the president and prime minister and really operated like a Uncle Tom then. He was an embarrassment. But now Dr. Rose says people like Medvedev are now making up for that period in their governmental life by being more hardcore, more definitive. He says Russia does not want to go to war with the United States because everybody realizes that a nuclear war between Russia and the United States would end all life on the planet. But he says the only way to deter Europe from going to war with Russia is to destroy Ukraine, to bring that regime down, and let whatever comes next come next. That's one position. Frankly, I think we said this last week or the week before. This war has drug out too long. You know, you had the Alaska summit. Well, what did you agree? They call it the spirit of Alaska. Well, what did you agree? If Trump is going to play you by saying, well, I'm not going to give them to Ukraine now, but I have the option to do that. What did you gain? Now, we will have to keep our eyes on this Budapest meeting. I think it's next week, but then I heard maybe 2 weeks from now. I don't think much will come out of it, and I'll explain why. John Mearsheimer, although he looks mainly at long-term trends in the relationship of what he calls great powers, John Mearsheimer probably, of all the public intellectuals dealing with strategic and foreign policy, is the most public. And you know, I really give him a lot of credit for his energy and tenacity in speaking to the public and sharing his expertise. You know, on a lot of things you differ with him, and that's no problem. But on the question of Russia and Ukraine, he has always adhered to a position that the Russians had interests that were existential, that NATO in Ukraine is an existential question, not anything less than that the security of Russia as a state demands a rapprochement, a détente, where Russia's interest in Europe and with European nations is recognized, that this rhetoric of Russia is an aggressor who ultimately wants to reestablish the Soviet Union, which, by the way, I don't see as the worst thing, but that's another question, who wants, and thus to take over Western Europe. They know that's a lie, but it is a lie to prepare the European people for war, which I think will be more difficult than they think. But Mearsheimer would agree with Gilbert Doctorow that we have crossed a red line. He does not go to the extent of Doctorow in suggesting, well, frankly, Doctorow suggests in a very interesting way that forces in the Russian military and in the security services could overthrow Putin. I am not aware of how many Russians have lost their lives in this war. Doctorow said 100,000. I haven't heard that number. When you listen to Mearsheimer and all of these people, they would say the Russians have lost 20,000. But Doctorow said 100,000. At any rate, Russian blood is in this war. And the Russian people are not ready to accept defeat or humiliation. And hence, you know, there's a growing clamor at the elite level and among the masses and in the media in Russia that Putin stop bullshitting. You know, let's keep it real about Trump. He's not our friend. And if saving Russia and Europe from what would be a world war requires a total war against Ukraine, let's get it on. Do you see the calculation? Mearsheimer does not go there, but he is suggesting the same thing that Doctorow is, that it's going on too long. If you can listen, I know it's hard for you, Samir, to listen to Mercurius, but Mercurius a couple of days ago said almost the same thing. This is taking too long. There will not, and all of them are coming to the conclusion, there will not be a diplomatic settlement to this. Of course, Trump ran on a platform of diplomatically solving this problem. Doctorow says, as many of us on that grounds and the general sense that he wanted to retreat from war, Doctorow says, I supported Trump. I mean, people like him are us. When we say we supported Trump, we supported that part of Trump. Nobody is just like, ain't nobody in here part of MAGA or none of that bullshit. But if he says that, and Biden was saying the opposite, well, there is a lesser of evils there. But Dr. Rose said he's one person that is guided by fact, and he changes his opinion if the facts change. I think that's Mearsheimer. I think, although Mearsheimer said he voted for Bernie Sanders 3 times, but a vote for Bernie Sanders in some ways was a hedging, and it's a vote for Trump. It's not a vote for Kamala, so to speak. Mercurius, as I said, with his very cautious way of talking, has said a similar thing. Niall Ferguson, I don't know whether you've ever heard of him.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to hear these people. They're big time players in the circles of the ruling elite. He's British.
Okay.
He is a historian, you've heard of him. He's a snotty, stuffy Britisher who impresses white Americans in particular, because he speaks with a British accent, and he went to Oxford. Now he's at Stanford, but I think the Hoover Institute. He's a historian that writes history from the angle and perspective of the British Empire and now the American Empire. And so history becomes a history of the resilience, endurance, et cetera, of the West and of white people. He is an intellectual white supremacist. Putin will learn. China will be taught that Western democracy unleashes all of the forces of creativity and yada, you've heard it before. And so, but he says, in his cynical way, that Putin will learn by the end of this year that he is lost. And if he F's around, and he doesn't put it this way, but this is the way he wants to, if Putin F's around for too long, he can be decapitated and taken out. There's always, and you guys, the more you study and follow these things, you'll see that there's always in the imperialist rhetoric, discourse, the threat that we will kill you. We will take you out. And that's what he's saying to Putin. F around too long, you won't have long on this earth. Which back to Dr. Rowe gives, from a rhetorical, polemical point of view, gives substance to what Dr. Rowe is saying. Because if Niall Ferguson talks this way, and Niall Ferguson is not just talking for Niall Ferguson, he's talking for the most powerful forces within Western Empire. If he talks like this, he's speaking for interests way beyond himself. And what Dr. Rowe is saying, Putin should get up off the pot. It's over. It's no longer a special military operation. Okay? Of course, Trump is feeling his oats now that he got this deal, the ceasefire in Gaza. I think it was Dr. or someone I heard, maybe you all heard something, who said that Putin, in some of his discussions, or one of his whatever, the last phone call they had between he and Trump, Putin told Trump that you were cheated out of the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm saying, wait a minute, dog. Now you done crossed the red line. I don't know whether he was trying to humor Trump or what. But like Dr. Rowe said, Trump used to talk about when he was a kid on the playgrounds in Leningrad. He said, the way you deal with a bully, you don't wait for the bully to step to you, you step to the bully. But Putin seems to be allowing himself to be bullied. Now, the Gaza ceasefire, to be honest with you, I don't think anybody really knows what it is. We know that there are 20 or 21 points, but thus far we've only gotten into the first 4 or 5. And it is a shaky ceasefire. It's not a peace in Gaza. Anybody that calls it a peace is crazy or just trying to mislead people. Hamas seems to have come out of the whole war thus far stronger, more capable, and even more prepared for war. Israel, on the other hand, is severely bloodied. Its domestic politics and chaos. Anybody that saw Trump's address before the Israeli Knesset. Anybody ever see the movie Birth of a Nation? Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Where they are trying to discredit Reconstruction, they make it look like all these black elected officials are nothing but coons and toms, eating fried chicken and feet on the table and all that type of thing. well, the real manifestation of that is the Israeli Knesset. I mean, you know how Jews try to make out how much they are the representatives of civilization and intellect and all of that. Look at the Israeli Knesset. And of course, Trump fits in very well with that type of atmosphere. He even called out to Marion Adelson, the billionaire, between her and her husband, literally owned Trump, you know, by buying his election. She's sitting up there, and Trump asked her from the podium, you know how he perpetrates and Marion, what country you love more, Israel or the United States? She sat there and looked at him. He said, you don't have to answer. I know which one you love more, Israel. Now, you to make America great, man. But that's how crazy. And then a couple of members of the Communist Party who are members of the Knesset, you know, they mounted a brief protest and they were drug out.
Who's the Communist Party?
Yeah.
Yeah, they still got one.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so the whole deal was, it was, like I say, the clown car and the circus train. And these are people who hold the fate of a big part of humanity in their hands because of their being armed by the United States. But Trump put enough pressure on Netanyahu and what they call the right-wing part of his government to get Netanyahu to sign on to the ceasefire. All the rest of this stuff about Hamas giving up its weapons, Hamas said, we're not giving up no weapons. Are you crazy? Or, a whole set of other demands. And Hamas said, we agreed to the ceasefire because our people needed a rest.
Mhm.
Then he goes to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and there the tone is completely different. The question is, was the substance different? That's yet to be decided. And there you have representatives of many Arab nations, including Egypt, including the Gulf states, I think Qatar, United Arab Emirates, other Muslim nations like Indonesia, a nation of over 250 million people, and Turkey, and then all of these European Union members, such as Italy, England, Canada's not EU, but Canada, and all. So here you get like all of these, and this is inverted comma, all of these world leaders are signing on to Trump's peace deal. Well, in fact, Trump's peace deal is pretty much the Arab peace demands put out, many times, but I think as recent as maybe 6 or 7 months ago, back in May or June. Now, this was good for Trump. By the way, Pakistan was there. And if y'all don't get a new prime minister, Pakistan will be a laughing stock. This guy can't control himself. He once again.
You know I'm related to him, right?
Yes, you're fine.
No, you.
Yeah.
What, by a distant cousin?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Don't make that too number, brother. This guy, I used to, we grew up looking at all of these Hollywood coon movies of black people, He could easily get a part in one of those films. That's the way the guy behaves.
His brother, my dad's cousin's son, they would take planes from London to Pakistan, and he would tell them to stop the plane in Saudi Arabia because he wanted nahari. So he wanted his favorite meal. So he would stop a whole plane.
Okay. The man is a gangster.
Man is a gangster.
Okay. But anyway, he cannot control. Every time he speaks, and he got to, but anyway, he cut the fool. But anyway, no one knows what this peace deal is. No one knows if it can be enforced, and no one can predict what the Israelis will do. Now, I think there's a larger context for this. Von Clausewitz, who we talked about a lot, always said that war is politics by other means, but that war, or the ability or willingness to go to war, reflects the political situation in a country. Israel is not the nation it was before this war began. Yes, the Palestinians have paid an enormous price. Yes, this is a genocide. But no people who have fought for freedom have not paid a high price. I will remind you of the Vietnamese people. They paid an enormous price to be free. And so the Palestinians are paying a price that they don't have to pay, but it's only because of the international situation, and in particular, the Arab and Gulf states that refuse to stand up. But at any rate, Israel is not what it was before this war began. And it wasn't all that before this war began. It was deeply divided. The war and the whole narrative around, what was it, October 7th, oh, they raped our children and women and all that shit. And they're holding on. That united Israel when they were severely divided over domestic, political, and legal questions. So, but now they once again came apart. They are severely divided. Some people say even on the cusp of a civil war type situation. Many Western nations are on the cusp of that, including our own. But it was becoming more difficult to get reservists to serve in the Israeli army. Some people suggest upwards of 1 million Israelis have left Israel and gone to Europe or Greece, or they like to be in Cyprus, I think, because the weather suits them. That a lot of the Americans who have Israeli and American citizenship, which is another level of hypocrisy and BS, they back in Brooklyn. Their real homeland. The Israelis were bloodied by the 12-day war with Iran. In Gaza, Hamas, and it's really not Hamas, it's Al-Aqsa. It's not Hamas that is fighting the war. Hamas is the government of Gaza. The army is something else. And now, their tunnels are still intact. They're making their weapons and they're getting better weapons, and they're tactically more able to deal with the Israelis. In spite of all and forgive me if I'm going too much into this, in spite of all the propaganda in the United States and the West, Hezbollah has not been destroyed and will not disarm. Okay? The Houthis or Al-Ansar in Yemen still wreaking havoc on shipping in the Red Sea. And Netanyahu has been indicted in the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court as a genocidist. And Israel, and I always draw attention to this, there's 16 million Jews in the world. I think they mean white Jews. 16 million in a population of 8 billion. How long, even with the support of a powerful military, can that people exist not just as a state, but live in a world where you are hated and disliked? Then, the insult of insults, the polling data of the US people. And this is we're not geostrategic analysts. We ain't sitting, in our living rooms and talking trash. We are concerned with the American people who can decide the outcome of all of these conflicts. And I'll explain that. One poll came out. More of the American population supports the Palestinians than support Israel. And they, credible polls. These are, what we would consider more reliable polls. Then a poll comes out. 61% of American Jews say Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza. 40% of them say that Israel is committing a genocide. These are Jews. Now, okay, you cut down, you smash the encampments. You didn't convince anybody. You just made me, as a Jewish student, more convinced that I was right. So you shut down the encampments, but you didn't win the war over the students. You know, students are strange animals because, you know, they go away for the summer break and come back and still will be talking to each other and cursing and, you know, smoking their weed and whatever they do and drinking their beer and saying, F Israel. The question, you know, a big question is the younger generation of Jews really Jews? Is that their identity? Or are they in that place where they're seeking a new identity? You know what I'm saying, Jerry? A new identity that is not white, not Jewish, but something else. We'll have to see. But nonetheless, Mamdani won in New York, not because there were a lot of Indians from East Africa to vote for him. He won because the youth vote, the pro-Palestinian vote. And there are a lot of Jewish young people in these universities who voted for him and will vote for him again, if for nothing else, as a protest against what happened at Columbia and other universities in New York and what they see happening in Palestine. You understand what I'm saying? Now, the politics. War is politics by other means. You know what I'm saying? Iran, the 12-day war, everybody admits. Trump can talk all that big willy talk all he wants. Israel called for a ceasefire. They were bloodied after the first attacks, and I don't understand how Iran is so casual in the defense and protection of its leaders and scientists. They're always getting killed so easily. But the first blow was the first blow. And then after that, Iran has the military and missile capacity to up the attack upon Israel. And now it is admitted that Iran is more capable of destroying Israel than the other way around. China and Russia have been rearming and rebuilding Iran's missile defense systems. I'm just going to say something quickly about the No Kings rally. I think we should go to it after free school. I would not put off free school for that, by the way. They will have, I hope, I think they should have upwards of 10 million people around the country. It's really organized from above, nonprofits, the Democratic Party, the corporate media, all that whole network. That was something like the Black Lives Matter marches in 2020. Black Lives Matter marches, very few Black people, So was it Black Lives or was it to elect Biden? Well, it was to elect Biden. Well, the thing that for me that gives, that tells us what the No Kings rally is about, what are the demands? Has anybody, because I've been on the website, TJ, you know what the demands are?
I have no idea. That's why I don't really feel strongly about going.
Say that again, man.
I don't really feel strongly about going because it's
it feels like it's more of a performative thing.
Yes.
Like to make people feel better about themselves.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, like I'm doing something. It feels like it's gonna be one of those like kind of like liberal values. We have like a dog with
But
a
see,
sign around his neck.
I think it really is, it's all about the 2026 election, and it's constantly mobilizing the Democratic Party base and pulling in independents and people disaffected from the Trump move, MAG and all. And I think that's all it is. I mean, here we are on the cusp, what could be the cusp of a world war, nuclear war. Did you call for peace? No. Have you called for a new kind of budget? You remember Coretta Scott King and them? A peace budget? Is that in the mix? I mean, what are you calling for? What is this about? Well, we know. At the same time, I think we should attend, not with any great enthusiasm, more or less to see and know. And it will be overwhelmingly black in a city that is not overwhelmingly white, in a city that, like Philly, that is not overwhelmingly white. I get no indication that they've gone to the black church. I think, some of the unions are involved, at least at the staff level, but there is no enthusiasm. So the No Kings, right? What do you mean no kings, man? Is that the issue? First of all, the whole title is thrown off, no program or demands to address the crisis of the American people. Ultimately, this is not about the American people. Now to Donald Trump. I think it is now clear that he ran in one way and now he's governing in another way. Most people that look at these things saw all of his overtures to peace. Even after his being elected, before inauguration, he reposted an ex, a Twitter, that Jeffrey Sachs had sent out, attacking Netanyahu and literally calling for peace. And I said, oh, wow, I'm going to take a victory lap, man. He's down with Jeffrey Sachs. Well, all of that meant nothing to him. And so now this is my own take, and it's a complicated thing because in some ways it is this convergence of the objective world situation with the personal ambitions of a single man. Let me tell you what I'm saying. He does not want, from his own personal thing, to be seen as that president who lost the American empire. He wants to be a war president and acknowledged as a peace president in the world at the same time. And he is thrown off. And he is surrounded not just by sycophants, but people who are as delusional as he is. Now, I think, and if Putin gets some backbone, and we'll see, it's yet to be seen, Trump will back down because he don't want war in Europe, and the Europeans cannot fight a war in Europe with Russia unless the United States is prepared to arm and finance that war. The Europeans are broke. France is broke. The French people in the street because the French government wants to reconfigure the pension system, which is a marker for the welfare system and the social contract with the French people. Germany, the same thing, deindustrialized, been in a recession for the last 2 years. I mean, do you think the French or the German people want to rush to war and I can't buy heating gas to heat my damn house? You understand? Inflation is off the charts, and you gonna tell me this your situation is this because of Vladimir Putin? No, I don't think so. And they are on the doorstep. The European, first of all, they know war like we don't. They know what destroyed cities look like in a way that we don't. They saw it twice in the 20th century. So there is a memory of war. I don't care what Macron or this cat that's the head of Germany or this bootlicker that's the head of NATO went up in the White House and called Trump daddy.
What?
Call him daddy, man, I ain't lying. Now that has double, I mean, daddy, what, are y'all in a gay relationship? I mean, for real, I'm not, or is he your daddy? Or has he adopted? Look, let's keep it 100. Grown man don't call another grown man daddy unless there's some, subtext to the whole situation. But nonetheless, this is the type of cats that claim to be leading Europe. You go to the White House, you my daddy. But there's a famous song, doo-wop song, by a group named Shep and the Limelights, entitled Daddy's Home. John will know this song. I would sing it, but my voice ain't up to par right now. Daddy's, okay, but anyway.
Usher also has Usher also has a song.
Oh, Usher sings Daddy's Home?
Probably different.
It's a different song.
Oh, I know it's been, who else covered it?
Usher.
Okay, cool, okay.
It's a different song.
Somebody should text that song to Homeboy. But anyway. NATO cannot fight Russia without the United States. John Mishheimer, in a recent podcast lecture, said that Europe, decades ago, relinquished or abandoned its sovereignty. The deal was American security guarantees, that is NATO, if Europe abandoned any right to have a sovereign, independent foreign policy. But European leaders are very concerned. They're not a part of the decision-making about anything. As you see, when they come to the White House, Trump is sitting behind his desk, and they're all sitting out here like school children. These are the heads of government, elected by people. And you're sitting there like a school child, and Trump is telling you, what you say? Well, anyway, you saw it. The image is very bad for Europe. But that is what Europe has been reduced to. Vassal regimes, vassal governments that are now on the cusp of being undone by the resistance of their own people. Macron is holding on by a thin reed. Now, why do I say all of this? This giving to Trump or making Trump feel that he is the king of the universe, that what he says and the threats that he makes will decide what will be the outcome, what history will look like. Now, Trump believes that. That's what's dangerous. He believes that. He will believe it until he runs into that brick wall. Part of the brick wall is China. Now, they can try as long as they want to minimize China's military, China's economy. You get some of these perpetrators. I'm talking too long. Let me get through this one. Some of these perpetrators that write and have podcasts, journalists, they come and go. They come a dime a dozen. They really do come cheap. Forgive me if I'm being, if you think this is abusive, but they're like a cheap hoe. That's all. They for sale. I didn't think that was funny. That's all they are. These journalists and even these politicians, they want to talk about China's economy. Well, last year it grew 5%. Oh, it's not the 10% it was for several 15 years, but 5%? It's nothing to sneeze at. And it's not based upon the inflation of the currency. It's based upon actual production. And we can see it. We can see the infrastructure being built. We can see the various electric cars and other things they are producing. Well, part of the brick wall is Trump felt that he could step to Xi Jinping and then people's gonna back down. And you know what? They don't understand Chinese history. They don't understand when them people talk about a century of humiliation. They're not jiving. They mean that, and we ain't gonna be humiliated like that again. When they talk about the spirit of the long march, they're not jiving. You know what I'm saying? When they talk about eradicating poverty, and when they look at their cities, when they look at what it was 10 years ago and what it is today, they said, wait a minute. Do not test us like this. The Chinese character is not to be boisterous and loud, but they don't like being bullied. The Japanese found that out in World War II. You know what I'm saying? That's why a lot of when Mearsheimer and them talk about global politics and their whole theory, you know, it's not a bad theory, but it's not an adequate theory. They don't take into account of people's history, of people's memory. Okay, so you're gonna bully us, right? So let me tell you what we're gonna do. You putting tariffs on us? We ain't buying no more soybeans from you. Let all y'all's farmers go hungry. Okay, now you wanna up it? Oh, okay, money. No more rare earth. We're not just talking about the minerals, but we're talking about the processed minerals. You ain't getting no more, dog. I'm gonna shut your military down. You know, game recognizes game. You gangster, I be gangster. You understand? Let's keep it one. Well, that's what Dr. Rose saying to Putin. You gonna let this cat gangster you like that? He's a punk, man. Step to this cat. Shut that noise up. Putin, well, I'm a lawyer. I'm dealing with legal matters and legal. Come on, money. This ain't what the game is no more. The West and the Americans don't give a damn about law. It's raw power, and that's what Trump thinks he's operating on, but his hand is weak. Here, why is his hand weak? I know I'm talking about, but we all know this. The American people say we're tired of war. How you going to give Israel all this? And here we can't even get health care. You know, Emily's Union. And it's heartbreaking, but it's understandable. Mm-hmm. They said we wanna go out on strike, but we can't afford it. And the leadership, the staff of this union, and this is nothing against young people, you 25, 26 years old, you know, you graduated from college. If you lose this job, you can get another one. I'm up here in Johnstown. I barely got a GED. I can't sacrifice my family. And then I look at the country. You know, a lot of people say I got to just chill for the time being. You know what I'm saying? They had to chill. And I guess they look at what happened here in Philadelphia with AFSCME, that debacle. You understand? So they had to chill. A lot of times, the ordinary person would say, have to chill and wait to fight another day. And that's what they had to do. The country is in an uncertain position. Now, MAGA. You understand what I'm saying? Okay, you MAGA, right? This is Trump. You all that MAGA. You got all these white people behind you. You're selling wolf tickets all over the world. You go, flying helicopters on top of person's apartment building. Anyway, but, both sides are playing the public relations game. Trump ain't doing that much. The demonstrators ain't doing that much. We both, parrying back and forth. A lot of shit is in court, all that. Trump going after his enemies. You know what I'm saying? But there will be a blowback. But you see what I'm saying? The country is not in no state to go to war. The people don't want it. This is why the No Kings March is such a non-starter. You want to mobilize the grassroots? Say, we for peace. We with Martin Luther King. A time to break silence. Don't you remember that? I thought all y'all white liberals had studied history. I thought y'all were the new Martin Luther King, the new civil rights. You want the spirit of the Black freedom movement, but you don't want its content. You want the picture of Martin Luther King, but you don't want the essence of Martin Luther King. If you was about something, the first thing out your mouth would be a time to break silence on war and poverty. But they ain't gonna do that, because that would require a commitment to the people. And the people know that those behind these marches in the Democratic Party have not made a commitment to them. And I think, this is the end of what I'm gonna say. I think that if they think they're going to put the Democratic Party back together that easily, they got another thought coming. It's not going to be done. First of all, they do not have a way or an ideology to bring back to the Democratic Party the working class. You lost them. Deindustrialization, the World Trade Organization, the financialization of the economy, the deterioration of the social contract. And everybody that works is looking at their children every day. My children are not safe. The schools are not safe. So, no kings. Shit, march on Sherelle Parker's office. Get that queen out of there. She's not a king, she's a queen, but a queen, not that kind of queen, king, and queen. Everything is double entendre these days. But you have to attack the system. If you want to win the people, you must attack the system itself, and thus the work of the free school. Not to be minimized or trivialized. A theory for now and the future, and thus it does flow from Du Bois, from Martin Luther King. The experience of the Third American Revolution, which sets the basis for another American Revolution, which will go beyond it, and hence the possibility of the People's Democratic seizure of power. Anything less than that is bullshit. We know not going back to identity politics. That's over. That's part of what created the crisis of separating the masses from the elites of the Democratic Party. All of those things that are of existential value to the petty bourgeoisie don't mean shit to working people. And in fact, working people resent them putting all these so-called cultural issues before the issues of life and children. I'll stop there.
Do we want to discuss that first?
We should have a discussion first, then we'll go to.
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
I wanted to clarify because I brought up my family
About
and
your uncle?
not my uncle, my cousin twice removed.
Okay. I thought, now, why don't you get to 3 times?
I think
I mean, you're still too close.
I wanted to clarify. I just like jokes. I wanted to clarify that there was another prime minister, but he's in jail because the U.S. intervened and what they call lawfare
Yeah.
and all that, and Trump he claims to be this anti-deep state president, or at least he claimed, but he's still letting the deep state operate. They had a coup in Nepal where they released 1,300 prisoners. And they're going to claim that Gen Z released all the prisoners, and Gen Z, burned down the parliament. And
they did, didn't they?
Well, that's the quote. I learned this from you, Doc. But quote unquote young people, but there are also reports of armed mass gunmen on the streets. So that's all the hallmarks of the color revolution.
And the same thing
like
just
Ukraine,
happened in Madagascar.
And all this.
Anime as their slogan.
Yeah, and it's all the pop culture is the slogan. It's lazy. It's copy paste. And the JFK files were released, and we know that there was a strong connection between the Hungarian freedom fighters and the anti-Castorites in Miami. And that's a little aside the point. But Donald Trump claimed to be against the deep state, but he made a compromise with the deep state, and I think that you were harsher on the compromise than I would be, because he did get something out of it. He got the big beautiful bill, but this compromise that he made has lost him the people, because it's been a big. Remember, I said last week that this is a guy who said he could shoot someone in the avenue and that people would still support him. But there's this line, and that line was Israel, and it's made me validate my commitment to the Palestinian cause, because I think you mentioned that.
I forgot to mention Venezuela.
Venezuela, because all these crises of empire that you eloquently said that he doesn't want to go down in history as responsible for it, because my main point is that he's in reality, and if you tone down the MAGA, the blue MAGA rhetoric and the media rhetoric, if you tone it down and you see past the healthcare argument, you see that it is a crisis of the state, that this budget, it's being used by Democrats and Republicans to say, oh, well, Democrats, they don't want to fund the government and they want to hold it hostage. And Democrats are saying, well, oh, Donald Trump is holding healthcare hostage. But really it's about economics and the financing the state and the social contract. And Venezuela, too, is a part of that, because, Donald Trump now he's in charge of managing these crises of supply chains. And with the, trade war with China, he's forced to look elsewhere for rare earth minerals, and he's, reasserting the Monroe Doctrine. But I've lost my train of thought. But what you said about
early stages.
It's something else. It's just a lot on the table to all grasp.
You feel my pain.
Yeah, no, I see what you do every Saturday, especially to speak for an hour and a half. I can't even put together 15 minutes. But I did want to say, on Zoran Mamdani, that it's not what you said about as a protest vote against Israel, and especially in New York. You know, I've met young Jewish people who are from New York, and it's not like they share anti-imperialist politics or anything, and that's why they're voting for Zoran. But just the Israeli identity is not valuable to young Jews because that was part of their socialization to become white. But now becoming white is not in vogue for them. Becoming a victim or having a non-white identity or exploring your identity is in vogue. So it's this contradiction with young people. And Zoran is not from what we are talking about today with art, and from his base is not connected to that. And so it'll be interesting to see what comes of it. He's already backing off positions, and that's what we expect from DSA candidates. But we go past that. We see what are the people trying to see in their struggle to against the ruling class. There's more, but all of other people.
Well, I was going to say that I really appreciated your remarks today, because I think it's always helpful when you anchor what's going on to how we've identified these 5 pillars of crises, like not so much this like very specific deadlock, say, between the Democrats and Republicans on the healthcare issue, but again, back to the deindustrialization and the cost of empire, the moral, the civilizational, the knowledge, and then also the middle one being like the crisis of legitimacy that I feel like is most readily apparent, but it's all connected to these other factors that have been long brewing in a long civilizational crisis, a long crisis of whiteness. But I feel like with the remarks that you gave also, that was connecting both, the worlds, all these different world points of tension, and also like active wars is also this, and like all these efforts for peace that are also thwarted is like, what came to mind was also this question of like, what time is it? Like how hungry people are for a new way of governing and actual peace and actual democracy. And then how much, like, I feel like some of the things you were saying, Samir, too, about like, not just what's in vogue, but also what's falling really out of what's really anachronistic in this time, and what's actually futuristic or modern, and what's actually the way in which people are really their desires and their visions and their aspirations for their children, their peace, like very much mirrored in the American people as it is around the world, which is like a really broad way of kind of weaving a couple of threads of what you were saying around Ukraine and Gaza, and then also the American people. But also what I was thinking a lot about, was a couple things where it's really clear, as you were kind of describing, like the American people, and the way in which, especially like young Jewish students or young students in general, kind of on the thread that you were raising, Samir, around like Zionism, being Israeli, like even the Democratic Party, all these different consensus are really, really like falling before their very eyes, and also they're very much in need or searching for a new identity and a new anchorage. And in many ways, there's a lot there to me that makes me think about, what you said about colored modernity as the future. And it is something that I've thought a lot about because of, the article that Nandita wrote last year, but also even like how much that as a concept could actually speak to the American people more so than all these things that come before, identity politics, even like Marxism and whatnot. But then the other thing I was thinking a lot about with even what you were saying about the No Kings rally, like this week was the 30th anniversary of the Million Man March. I thought a lot about what the last time there actually was a substantive calling together of millions of people on a place as politically significant as like the National Mall, and from all parts of the country, and also around an actual program. And those who actually went to some of the events, the commemorative events this week, say in New York, I wasn't able to go, should also speak to this more, because I'm like, for me, the most poignant things I've come to learn about the Million Man March is especially those photographs of all these Black men, but also not just Black men, Black women, you know, Hispanic men, like, you know, Minister Abel had posted that he had gone as a young person, but also all the people that really came together around this crisis of Black men in the midst of the crime bill, in the midst of, you know, a very new face of white supremacy in the 90s, following the counter-revolution of the decades of the 70s and 80s. All of that to me, like, speaks to, I mean, it says so much compared to, I mean, how little so many of these gatherings, these protests, these rallies, Black Lives Matter, so many others, in the last decade or two that, you know, have shaped my, you know, like, what I've seen of, like, you know, protests that have gone on in my lifetime versus actually seeing those very beautiful photographs of, like, Mr. Farrakhan speaking in front of the Capitol, like, proposing that there is such a thing as a new kind of moral, like a new kind of governance possible based on a moral law that is not the law of the land yet, but people are hungry for it, and also how much that the crisis of Black men or Black young men actually can be addressed through, you know, that kind of, well, this is where I'm a little fuzzy, but I know there's a lot of programs, there's a lot of, like, basically what that was a moment where it actually was connected to demands, programs, and something that could actually offer a substantive alternative to the people. And it made me think a lot about the Poor People's Campaign, as you were saying, like Coretta's budget, people's budget. It made me even think about King's 1963 March on Washington that was for demanding jobs and freedom, and how that's so, like, even if those are the images, the stories, and narratives that are most invoked when people are like, when we want to gather together, we want to feel like we, you know, it felt like that day of, like, you know, August 28th, like 1963. We want to, like, have that kind of look or that kind of feeling, especially if you're the organizer of these marches, but actually to take up those, that tradition or that actual retreat in substance and earnestly, and not just posturing and not just the aesthetics of it, or to instrumentalize people's desire to come together around something different for your own purposes, your own agenda. To re-cement the ruling class agenda is really, like, at play right now, and I feel that that's something. I'm also looking forward to Serafina's remarks, because I feel that, you know, even something like the Million Man March shows the need for a people's, like, renewal of their imaginary, or their searching for even worshiping new values or new civilization or new ideals of beauty, new ideals of what the human being can look like. That I think in many ways it is through art that that's crystallized, but also through when people are actually moved by those very ideals to act or to behave or to, you know, present themselves, all these things that, like, the beginnings of basically a new kind of movement or a new kind of crystallization of a civilization can really begin. But I mean, I'm kind of connecting a lot of dots here, so you tell me if I'm, like, kind of maybe combining a couple different ideas here, but that's what your remarks and also where we're going to go in a couple minutes around Black art made me think a lot about. And also this week of this tremendous anniversary that, this tremendous anniversary that I think has a lot to speak to this moment, but it's actually kind of interesting who can actually excavate that memory of the Million Man March for this time and apply the right lessons for.
Well, yeah, picking up on the Million Man March commemoration, a few of us went to Newark for the commemoration of the 30th anniversary.
Newark.
Yeah, Newark. At St. James African Methodist High School, which I mean, it was new to me, but I learned that they were, like, really central in terms of the organizing of the Million Man March was like a venue, almost in the way that it seems like the Church of the Advocate used to play a certain role. And I think on the positive side, I learned a lot in terms of like what the actual, not just the organizing of the Million Men March, but what it meant to the people who were there. And there's a way that, for instance, the Nation of Islam will describe it as a glimpse of heaven. And, Minister Farrakhan put out a call for 1 million men, and then 2 million men showed up. And all of the recollections of it, which were interestingly both, it was the two main speakers at Newark were, what was his name? Larry Ham. Larry Ham, and then another one, Amina Bay, whose sister was supposed to speak, but then mother was supposed, yeah. And so yeah, interesting perspectives from both, especially the women who supported the Million Man March, but then also the direct participation. But that they talked a lot about. I mean, what I took away from it was, yeah, it was like the most peaceful day. And because actually one thing that was spoken of, which I didn't know, was that apparently Clinton had left town on the day of the Million Men March, but apparently there were U.S. soldiers stationed underground in D.C. in case anything went off. And nothing went off. Like there's a lot of all the stories about it from everyone who went. It's like not just that the men who came were peaceful, but that there was this spirit of solidarity that I think it seems like it really has lived in the spirit and the memory of people since that day. And I think also with the 15 years ago, there was a millions more march. And actually it raised for me an interesting question of why not call another Million Men March today? And I think that's a deeper question, which I think maybe requires more examination in terms of the different forces involved. But I think, yeah, a lot of I don't know, what I took away from it was like, yeah, what is that? It's not like the Million Men March could have solved all the problems that Black people were confronted with and still are confronted with. But still, what is the purpose of something like the Million Men March in terms of giving people a vision of what the new society would look like, of even, like Kathy was saying, of even a new civilization as not just like this abstract thing, but civilization as in the mode of existence that human beings operate on, and the common frames of reference, the common language, the common assumptions that one would picture in that new society. And I think that for me was really, I don't know, just like interesting and important to get a sense of. And I also, to the other parts that Doc brought up in the remarks, I think part of what I feel like I'm grappling with is, I feel like it's that also because you came up in a time when, let's say, national liberation struggles and people's war were happening all around the world. And I think the closest thing that we have to that today is the Palestinian resistance against Israel. And yet at the same time, I feel a little bit like I'm not sure how to make sense of the current moment, because we say this all the time, but like my preference is like, whether it's Ukraine even or Gaza, like, yeah, I don't see it making sense for Russia to like Gaza Kiev, for example. But that's just because it's like also like I grew up in a certain time, and I have certain also, I feel like what we do hold in free school are certain moral assumptions which come from, King. And at the same time, I think it has been kind of a wake-up call in the sense of like, it's like, yes, there are things that one prefers, especially in the moral sense and the moral vision, but also that like there is like realpolitik, there is like actual, these questions of states, of, especially the neo-Nazi control in Ukraine with Zelensky and all them, and then obviously with Israel. And I feel like I'm just trying to make out what, like Kathy said, what time in the history of the world is it? And I was reading this interesting article by a Chinese scholar who was saying that something, and I don't know if I completely buy this analogy, but that like there's maybe a parallel between this period in the world's history and the history of the world order with China's Warring States period.
Ooh.
And it's not just that you have different kingdoms and territories vying for control over China's civilization, but that it was also this period of innovation in terms of what the Chinese state would look like, and different competing visions of what Chinese civilization would look like, especially at the level of like, you know, this innovation of bureaucracy, of Chinese statecraft, of governance, and a lot of it emerged.
Gunpowder.
Yeah, gunpowder. Well, a lot of it emerges out of, I think, the Warring States period.
Yeah.
And I think in that sense,
Can you say what the Warring States?
it was like, I don't know, I forget which centuries this was, but
I had to look it up, but
okay.
I'll be brief. It was like around 500 BCE to 200 BCE,
Right.
which is kind of around the time of a lot of Greek city-states too.
right.
But it was also like China was not yet, there was some periods of unification, but kingdoms, warlords, fights all the time, 100 periods, but actually it's also known as a time of 100 schools of thought.
Yes.
From
Right.
which Confucius, but also like like Taoism's mention like all these like
Yes, yes,
thinkers.
yeah, right.
Basically, it was not just a war by its politics by other means, philosophy
Right.
by other means. Many people are trying to explain like actually if we're going to go try to reunify like what governance, what systems, and so it holds this very classical period of like an imaginary
Right.
thinkers since, because many would reference that the Han Dynasty, the Qing, many others have been like, oh, that was where a lot of our ideas come from, a period of disunity. So
Right.
ideas for unity.
Because I think that there are maybe valuable insights from people like Mearsheimer, but ultimately, philosophically, I don't really buy into
It's very interesting.
the whole great power, realism, neo-realism
Yes.
school. But I think it is true that, yes, there are things that Trump represents which are very kind of consistent in terms of what white supremacy looks like and what, you know, white man looks like, which I think are true. But I think also Trump does represent something new, which isn't necessarily something good, but something new, which is
Why don't we say something different?
something different, qualitatively different. Well, in the sense, like, I guess we can argue these things, but like in the sense that he is a break from that period of the past
Yes.
70 years of US unipolar hegemony, but also
Yes.
the need to insist on, even if it's hypocritical, of like, there are rules that we set up as in the US, as in the West, and we need to maintain the appearance of these rules. And, you know, you have to have the UN, you have to have the appearance of global governance. And Trump represents that break of like, no, fuck that. Like, there are no rules. We are making up the rules, and we can bomb whoever we want. We can sanction whoever we want. And at the same time, it's also like, that's also why, like, even if the Gaza stuff actually ends up turning badly, it's like part of what was interesting in terms of even listening to like descriptions of the statecraft involved, these different leaders, is that like, and I don't know if this is really true, but there's that guy Jeremy Scahill, the journalist with Drop Site. He was describing how even from the Palestinian side, the Hamas negotiating leadership, they were like, the difference between Biden and Trump is that actually Biden is like a bona fide Zionist. He really believes in Zionism. And that Trump, even if he's bought by the Zionists, he's like not that like ideologically committed to Zionism in the same way. And he really sees it more in terms of this transactional thing. And it even bore out in terms of the negotiating pieces of like the Israelis, I mean, yeah, these are things that can be debated, but the Israelis were like, we can't allow these, national leaders like Marwan Barghouti to be released and all that stuff. And then Trump and his people are just like, why? Like, why does that matter? Like they're really interested in, like whether it's the Gaza Riviera thing, which is, like a horrific and atrocious vision for what would happen in Gaza. But I guess I wanted to bring up of like, I do think that there is something different about this moment, which isn't necessarily good, but I do see it as almost like the way I was trying to make sense of it, even when we talked about the UN, Trump speaking at the UN was like, there's the definitive old order, which is represented by, the kind of establishment, globalist people who are trying to be like, oh, the UN still matters because so-and-so reasons, but they're all like, kind of liberal and that like neoliberal, whatever. And Trump is like, no, like we are going to argue for, like white civilization in plain terms. And then at the same time, it's like, and then at the same time, you do have this emerging, not yet fully consolidated potential new order, which is represented by the darker nations of the world. But it's like, and in that sense, it's not even accurate to call it just a multipolar world, which is defined by this country versus that country versus that country, but a time of contending epochs almost. Contending visions of the world order.
Yeah, that's where we are. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interfere. I agree.
Yeah, I think I also wanted to talk about the Million Man March in relation to the No Kings rallies and so on. But I think, there was a lot in what you said. I'm still wrapping my head around it. But I think this thing that you said about Trump basically being both for empire and then also trying to be for peace at the same time, that's sort of where I got stuck, because it took me back to like before the election last year, right? I mean, we were at a time like right before the election. I think there was also this period where Biden was sort of AWOL, but yet the US government, the US state had sent these missiles to Ukraine. And there was that question. I remember we even spoke about it at an event we did. I can't remember which event it was, but basically it felt like, okay, we are at the brink of nuclear war, and this election is extremely important to decide if, this is like Jeremiah was saying, that establishment could be defeated on a peace ticket that Trump was running on. And I feel like a lot of the optimism that it could actually become reality came from the fact that at the same time, at that point, Trump also represented an imperial retreat. Like, it seemed like keeping up American empire in the form that it has existed over the last 80 years or so was not something that he seemed so interested in prioritizing, because he went after the deep state, he went after the universities, and all of that. But we've basically seen how that has played out. It didn't really play out that way. And I guess the main lesson I take from that is basically the lesson is to not pin your hopes on the ruling class, or to not pin your hopes on the resolution for this coming from the machinery of the government and the state, which brings back this question of power to the people and how can that be achieved. And the way I was thinking about it, like the No Kings, even what you were saying, what are your demands? Like, what are you really bringing 10 million people together on the basis of? And then if you compare it to the Million Man March, I feel like if you were to ask any of these people who really believe that this No Kings protest or whatever could really change history or could change the course of this country, if you put the question to them, oh, do you support American empire, or should America be an empire? I'm pretty certain a lot of them would find it very easy to say no. Like, oh, empire, just bad, it shouldn't be like that. But I think what it also involves, together with saying that, is also a reassessment of what role, whether intentionally or unintentionally, you have played in keeping the empire the way it is. Especially for the liberal, college-educated elite, it involves certain sacrifices. It involves seeing life in a different way. It involves seeing poverty and the poor not from just this like place of philanthropy and pity and so on, but to actually see it as a moral crime that you are complicit in if there are certain terms on which you're living your life which are consistent with the terms of empire. And yeah, I mean, that's why I was also thinking, I mean, enough has been said. Kathy and Jeremiah were also already saying some of what I was feeling. The distinctness of the terms on which those 2 million men came together for the Million Man March is really, it was that civilizational question. It was that moral question. And without that, I don't think history can really be changed. I mean, you can get 10 million, you can get 20 million people to, but yeah, exactly what are you saying about the big questions, not just like the ICE rates and immigrant. I understand like some of that has seemed very ugly and it's very hard to feel good about the way Trump went about it. But yeah.
Well, because the three demands or slogans even of the Million Man March were atonement, reconciliation, and responsibility.
Yeah.
Those were the three concepts that brought together those 2 million Black men and many more people who supported them and made it possible for the Million Man March to happen. And I just feel like it's both the question of war and peace, which is central and existential in our time, but the way that the Black freedom struggle represents a mode of politics in which these questions of morality are also central. And the way that and it's like, it's almost like, yeah, like what Minister Farrakhan was saying at that time, and I think still represents is, yeah, like a call to Black people to accept responsibility in terms of defining their own future, and that being a moral thing. And I think the most moving part was Larry Hamm talked about how he was like, there were rivers of tears on that day at the Million Man March. And some of those were tears of joy, but others were tears of atonement, tears of catharsis, tears of all these Black men who had been brought together, who it was almost like releasing a kind of pain that they had inside. And I don't know, I just felt like that was very moving because it actually reminded me of, some of us recently went to the United House of Prayer for All People, the mother location in South Philly. And like, I think there's much more to say about it, but the tenor and the meaning of the music that we experienced, it felt so much like that, like this release of like everything that people, especially Black people, hold inside themselves, and the ability to experience it collectively. I don't know, it was just, yeah.
Can I just say something, if you don't mind, just having been there participating, helping to organize it. You know, Philadelphia had the largest contingent, and the two pillars of organizing Philadelphia were 1199C and AFSCME, District Council 33. Why is that important? The convergence of the moral civilization with the proletariat. There was no two ways about it. And the only way you could not understand that is because you didn't want to understand it. The other thing is, it was the Black community expressing forever, and it never could get a condemnation of Zionism, because for Farrakhan to be the leader of it meant that all of the Zionist organizations attacked it, ADL, Congress of Jews, and then to use the whole media to attack the march, and so, but it didn't, I can tell you, it made no difference whatsoever to us. And I think you put it absolutely right, that, you see, did we change the world forever? I don't think so. But did we change things? I think so. And we can't, I see this, the spiritual life world of a people is as important as the material life. And you're right. I mean, I know the woman that I was going with at the time. I could never, she wouldn't allow me to look her in the face if I didn't go on the Million Man March. It was, and so therefore, when Angela Davis and others on the basis of a feminist line attacked it, well, you're attacking it, and here's Rosa Parks. Here's Maya Angelou. Here is, and no one twisted Rosa Parks. And this is the great Rosa Parks. And right on the stage. And highly dignified, which put the lie to this idea that Black men are inherently violent. But I agree with everything. And it's hard to measure sometimes the impact of all of this on the future, on our life world after that. I know I was telling Sarah and Nuri and Purba that upon returning here in Philadelphia, we formed an organization which existed for about 10 years called the African American Freedom and Reconstruction League. And then even out of that came, Gregory Walker's Brothers Network. I mean, not out of the freedoms, but out of the spirit of the Million Man March, that Black men, the Freedom and Reconstruction League was not just Black men, but the Brothers Network. And the inspiration for that was to bring Black men together across the sexuality line. And that, and it was really successful, more Baldwinian in its outlook.
Well, I think some of the strongest parts of the speech or people's commemorations of it was, I think Kingian, or I want to connect it to King because I feel like some of the strongest parts of Farrakhan's message was the defense of King.
Yeah.
And in his speech in particular, well, because I had similar questions to what some people had mentioned, which is what could have united millions of Black men and women in this way in a period that is the beginning or in the middle of the counter-revolution on the Black community, and to elevate their consciousness in this way, because I think a common message from what people had seen or what people were saying and also what people had said online is I went to that march and I was a different man when I returned home, and I felt that I needed to do something, and whatever they attempted to do was not superficial. And I think that's very Kingian or nonviolent in the sense that that one day was able to produce new Black men and Black women to an extent. And even if it's, it's not everything, but I find it useful and you raised this question at the end of your remarks. What a movement of the people in this moment of crisis would look like, and on what program, what principles could the unity and the consciousness of the people be raised? And that's why I find looking at the Million Men March useful, because he had emphasized, first, I think it's very important that he emphasizes the beginnings of a genocide on the Black community and Black men in particular. And I see that message a lot when he's speaking in the 1990s. And then he identifies the resolution as effectively a civilizational one through the creation of a new Black man and a new Black woman. And that new human being able to wrestle with this new evil, this new stage of white supremacy, and to form an alternative to it. Basically preparing the people also for a new civilization or a new governance. And also a new civilization and a new governance. And also I also thought it was important that he identifies the existence of evil in a way that I think is distinctive from King's time, because the white supremacist nature of the state has evolved, 3-4 decades later at that point, and the crisis has deepened. In some ways, I just wanted to draw up that last point you were saying when you said that it is a total revolution of the system as it is that would be the uniting point for the American people today. And I think I wanted to spend some time articulating some of that because, you also made this point that the majority of the American people have polled not in support of the Israeli people, but in support of the Palestinian people. And then at the same time, like Jeremiah was mentioning, why is it no longer possible to make a call for the Black community in a way that was achievable during the Million Man March? And we haven't seen anything like it since then. And I don't know if I can connect all of that right now, but I think us striving toward that is important, like continuing to drive toward that source of, how would that movement be achieved again? I guess the last thing I'll say is that I felt the Newark event was representative of the general, like, ideological landscape of how people who had gone to the march or people who are trying to commemorate it today is. And what I mean by that is, I think people recognize its centrality and its achievement. I think that's clear. I think it's totally unclear how the revolutionary spirit of the movement, how the revolutionary spirit or the revolutionary program of the march is carried forward today. And from what I saw, the events in Philadelphia are very ideologically weak and very non-ideological. I think the largest Million Man March commemoration is really a 5K. Like that's really, that's really weak and really corny also. It's a 5K, like this is a marathon or something like that.
Really?
So tomorrow, the official commemoration of the Million Man March, which has been led by a nonprofit, is for people to begin in Northwest and South Philly. And South Philly is like broad and Christian or something, like that's their starting point for South Philly. And then to converge at Love Park. For everybody to walk 2 miles and then converge at Love Park. That's the primary commemoration in the city.
Who's behind that?
Really true.
Yeah, it's a nonprofit.
But what's the name of the nonprofit?
Philly Truce.
Philly Truce.
But I think there's people in the nation who are
Yeah.
involved in it. It's like basically an anti-gun violence.
Well, sorry. Just one more quick thing. I think what I'm trying to say is, if that modern vision, like that modern version of the Kingian vision, were to be put forth to the people today, they would respond. I think that's part of what I'm trying to say. And I think the Million Man March is evidence of that. And then I think we have other evidences, as you've described. And I think it's our task to formulate that vision.
Okay, well, I wanted to read some comments because there are some really good ones today, and then I also wanted to respond a bit. But okay, people said good morning. People Unite asked, why are we all paying taxes on printed money? NJ says, white supremacy is a wave of distortion that distorted everyone's history.
Could you say that again?
White supremacy is a wave of distortion that has distorted everyone's sense of history. Theron said, good morning, Free School. Great seeing a contingent of you guys at Newark's 30th anniversary of the Million Man March. People Unite said, bless the young, they see this madness, they will prevail. And David Ball said, nuclear war is the grandest of all misnomers. Nuclear holocaust is more like it. When you were talking about the Soviet Union maybe reconstituting itself, David said, a Soviet Union, this time without revisionist sellouts. And actually, David Ball has a lot of interesting comments. I'm just going to read those together. But he said, in terms of this nuclear escalation, you're standing at opposite ends in a pool of gasoline and you brag about holding a book of matches.
I couldn't understand what you said, no.
Okay. You're standing at opposite ends in a pool of gasoline, but you're bragging about holding a book of matches to blow it all up. And then on the Million Man March, well, before that, David also said, Napoleon told you to leave China alone. You should listen to the man. And then when you give up being white, then the question of being non-white has no meaning, only in terms of the struggle to advance humanity in a whole in a revolutionary context. And then on the Million Man March, David said, U.S. ruling elites were shaking in their boots when a man who can't be bought can call up 2 million men. Give me 2 million men with an affirmatively accurate and acceptable self-image, and I will show you 2 million potential revolutionaries. Angela Davis was in a television studio being critical of the march. She should have been there speaking. She missed a revolutionary moment, and it was not her finest hour. And then Meghna said, yes, the Million Man March speech by Farrakhan was focused on internal revolution and change. This is also a message for citizens of a dying empire. I also liked how he said that America can only save itself if it rejects racism to recognize salvation from the black man, as Pharaoh listened to Joseph. This is completely different than the No Kings message, which is all negative and fear-driven and has no recognition of responsibility, let alone atonement.
Go ahead, Meg.
Yeah. But yeah, I think just building on what everybody's been talking about, I think one thing that stood out from your remarks was how you were also describing this thing of a people's memory, where you were saying that Europe has memories of the destroyed cities. It actually knows and remembers like the pain of war, or China has the memory of the century of humiliation in the Long March. And I was thinking about it because in some ways, I think that's kind of a modern sense, you know, that there's a whole people's consciousness, there's a shared memory. And in some ways that is, like, it's a reflection of the democratic capacity because that memory can be drawn on and called upon to basically fulfill, like, I don't know, like a need that is met, where it's not like, it can conjure up a sense of like, no, we want to be principled in the face of struggle. No, we want to struggle against empire. Or no, we are not for war, we stand for peace. And we know this because we paid the cost of it before and we aren't going to do it again. And I just think that that's an important asset in a way when we're talking about the ideological struggle in this time. And it's important because in some ways, like the state or the ruling elite will want to draw on and I think manipulate people's memory. And in some ways, I think even the No Kings protest is kind of a distorted example of this, where it's baked on the assumption that America is founded on this thing of no kings and our history of the American Revolution, 1776, that is in the people's memory and that people will organically respond to that because that's how like what the American history like means to us. That like we don't have tyrants and like we blah blah blah. And I find it like interesting on the one hand, but also pretty weak because is that actually like a living memory?
Right.
And I do think that people want democracy. I do think that there's a memory and a recognition of the need for democracy, but I think that that memory, that shared experience is the most concrete and clear when it comes to King and the civil rights movement and like the Million Man March. Like that memory is actually alive and it's intact. And so I think I think that this question of like, but it's also that this memory thing I just think is very much tied to like a sense of consciousness and a commitment to actually being responsible. And so, yeah, and I also was thinking about just the whole remarks on Trump and all of the various world crises. And it's really interesting because the sense that I got from you talking, especially when you're saying that Trump doesn't want to be the one on the line to have basically like ended US empire, to have like basically let it all go. And it's so interesting because when he was first elected and came into office, everybody had the sense that actually there's a popular mandate. He's actually immensely powerful. He's capable of forcing his will, like both on the government, the federal agencies, the American people, and even in a sense like the world with like some of the tariffs or like the trade war. That actually like Trump is very, very, very powerful. But increasingly the sense that I got from your remarks today is that actually he's kind of backed in a bit of a corner. Like it's actually a very weak position, because how is it that you have somehow set yourself up where you campaigned on peace, you need to continue these wars, you want to have peace so that you can assuage your ego and make a case for the Nobel Peace Prize.
And you can make up fake wars that you
Yeah,
saw.
but like you can't actually end the wars, because that would mean the end of U.S. empire, or it would be retreat.
Yes.
You want to force all of these 100% tariffs on China and all this stuff, but you don't have the domestic capacity to produce anything. You want to say that America is the world's strongest economy, but it's all built on basically like this AI inflation bubble thing. And like, where are you going to go? Because I feel like it's before it was like Trump and the people who supported him against like the deep state, the ruling elite. But now it's like, where are the people? And like you've spent all of this all of your political capital, all of what you said that you would do, in basically like isolating yourself. And
From the people here or from the world?
I mean both. And so I feel like increasingly it's almost that there's just this consolidated administration. And that's why I think like Russell Vought and like Tom Homan and Stephen Miller, like all these sycophants, like that's basically what is most like increasingly left.
Building on that, I wanted to connect the declining U.S. empire with America's revolutionary future. We talked about today how the United States is unable to maintain itself as an empire financially, while at the same time function as a state and govern with some kind of social contract, due to the cost of empire mounting growing debt that the United States will be unable to pay, and will result in pretty much all government spending going towards that due to war. And
towards paying the interest.
Paying the interest on the debt, which I think it was very important that you brought up how the bond market is a measure of that.
More than the stock market.
Much more than the stock market.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. Because basically, like, the bond market is like, if I'm the United States government and I like give Samir a bond, which is just a piece of paper that isn't necessarily worth a damn thing, then Samir gives me money and then I spend it on war. And really, like, and the bond market is upheld through like international finance. So it's a way to measure the world, how the world system and all the dark peoples of the world are essentially forced to cooperate with the United States empire because of a lack of an alternative. Now, when the world is kind of forced to cooperate, they'll buy a lot of bonds, and the United States will have money for war, and the interest rate that they pay on the bonds will be low because they're in high demand.
Right.
When people don't buy the bonds, like with this whole Liberation Day fiasco, nobody wants the bonds. The United States doesn't have the money that it was expecting to uphold itself to fund war, and then the interest rates on the bonds go even higher.
Absolutely.
And so,
well, can I say one thing? Or the world will not buy your debt unless you are prepared to pay a high rate of interest.
A very high rate of interest.
So it's almost like the creditors, rather than the debt, are driving the thing.
Yes.
They might lose confidence in the American government. Like if they lose confidence in Trump, which I think they will.
They don't trust.
That's right. You see what I'm saying? So the guy, like Nuri said, the guy is up shit's creek. But go ahead, I'm sorry. Forgive me, Eddie.
Pretty much, people are not confident. Oh my God, are we going to actually get our money back? If the answer is no, then that's why people have been buying a lot of gold too. The price of gold has gone up. And China doesn't want to buy bonds as well. So basically, it's a numerical measure, right? And it's not very exciting to look at. But basically, if the yield is high, people are doing something else. People are working towards an alternative. And it's possible that if people work towards an alternative, then the whole system could collapse, which is a beautiful thing, you know. But that still leaves on the table for us remaking of the American people. Just because the United States empire collapses doesn't mean that we have justice in this country and a people as itself. My example of that is like Europe destroyed itself through these world wars and had to stay back as the foremost imperialist force. But now what is Europe but a very like stagnant place? It's kind of like a walking like old living museum. The task still falls upon us to create a new American people that can both live in cooperation and brotherhood with each other and with the world, to remake ourselves as a civilization for peace.
Well, I just want to say one thing about the historical memory thing, which is that, interestingly, on both sides of the Trump thing, but also the liberals, is the invocation of 1776 and the First American
Can I
Revolution.
ask you a question? Why not 1789 and the French Revolution?
Well, the no kings thing is
you're talking about no. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
no
Forgive me,
kings.
forgive me.
But then also the Trump people are trying to like go back to the original American Revolution. But the funny thing is that especially, I mean, not even for the MAGA people, but for the liberals, the funny thing is like because we went to the first No Kings thing, and it's like, yeah, we went with Emily, the first one, and it's almost like rather than even directly, because no one has historical memory of 1776, but it's like what people are imagining is like it's like they're imagining like the play Hamilton. It's like I feel like that's literally what people's imagine. Yeah, like that's what people's like memory is of like quote unquote memory, the imagined, the fabricated, the fictional memory of like that revolution. It's like literally all the liberals in like 2010 who are like really into the play Hamilton, and like they picture Trump as like the King George character. Like I think that's like literally play acting what people are play acting what they imagined of that time. But the funny thing is that it's like, you know, when Lenin writes The State and Revolution, he's referencing Marx and Paris Commune and what you call the springtime of the European revolutions, the mid 1800s, when like actually there was a memory of that revolutionary period in Europe's history. But it's like, that was important for Lenin to invoke, I think, even from a rhetorical and political standpoint. But it's like the thing that both sides of like basically the white world are avoiding is the direct memory of the Third American Revolution, because they can't wrap their heads around it. And so they have to go to an imagined revolution. Because yeah, like literally Ken Burns is doing a documentary series on 1776. Like that's his new project. So, yeah.
I also wanted to say, I think it was just 2 years back when 1776 was only been talked about as a counter revolution. Because that throwing it in. Make up your mind.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, the 250th anniversary. Maybe.
Well, no, sorry. Yeah, you can go.
You want to start?
Farrakhan also talks about the Constitution.
Right.
Different when it's actually coming. Yeah.
Oh, the bars are great. I think he wants to.
Did you want to transition?
Yeah.
Oh, because it just seemed like people were saying so much.
Right. No, I mean, you know, like I was just going to like add, and maybe you know, this is no, because like yeah, what Nuri brought up and this question of the historical memory. Been thinking about it because like just last week we were like last week at the Lucian Blackwell reading room we just started reading The Immortal Child, and I was thinking of like what Nuri was saying, this idea of sort of attempting to skip over history and being out of touch with reality, and sort of why also where you ended your your initial remarks that looking at the world and actually being in touch with reality means something for our lives, and especially for us to understand why why do we take any of this seriously? What does free school mean? And I think, like you were saying, something, and I'm like kind of paraphrasing you about a theory for the future, because when like in The Immortal Child, Du Bois is making the argument not only that the fight that we're trying to fight is, it's not for us. It's not for us to reap the rewards of it. It's going to be a thankless job. It's for the future. But then he's also identifying that what is the meaning of, when he talks about what happens to a black child who understands the shameful wrong of the white world. He says that it gives you this power, and when this power is intelligently trained, it makes you believe in the possibility of in your own possibilities. He sort of talks about power and the glory, and I mean, like we were talking about this last week, but the conversation today about the Million Man March and about why we take not just Du Bois, but really why we try to base our lives in a certain way, why we want to why we fight for Du Bois, not just to read and study and so on. I think it makes me think that what we are the Million Man March and this long history that comes from the Black freedom struggle, it is the only link possible to understand this world. Because I'm thinking of how we spent a long time thinking about a year or more back talking about Baldwin, when this whole idea that there is such a thing as identity, there is such a thing as what we believe our lives to be about, what our systems of reality is. And in moments of great transition like we're facing clearly, all of this is up for grabs, all of this is in question, all of this is thrown in the air, and we have to actually, this also means kind of an opportunity for us to become something new. And I was going to say that the Million Man March, the conversation about the Million Man March made me think that, these words on the terms on which people took this history, that, the struggle is not simply something to be rid of, but it's something which will allow us to define ourselves, allow us to change ourselves. And I wanted to say that this is why I think the question of free school and why we take ideas seriously, it's not simply to sort of fight over what is the right way to look at this or that, but it's really about it's really the only way to be in touch with reality at this point. When all of our assumptions are in question, they are being thrown into question, which is what is the the revolutionary legacy of this country? Which way do we go? Is it the first American Revolution? And because I think the rallies and protests and even the idea of activism today is not to transform ourselves. It's to feel better about ourselves. That's sort of the attitude that we have, to know things and so on and so forth. And I just wanted to say that because I think this is why the role, truth becomes important. And I think, Serafina, you wanted to talk about art, but I wanted to say that this is why we take truth seriously, because it means something about how we understand this time. Maybe you want.
Okay.
Speak up to Serafina.
No, I always appreciate, Mary, how you come to conclusions, because you read the in between the lines and you notice the ironic quality of how things happen, and you compare them. And I find that interesting because trying to think about the topic of a new, human being, culture, this Black arts question that we've been going over for a while. I went through the amount of, or the body of work that is very readily available to us in And the reason why I say that it's available to us in preschool is because we've specified how to look at different people like Baldwin, Lorraine Hansberry, or even Nina Simone in a way that the universities, I don't think, have, and I don't think that common consensus has brought, or it hasn't been made public enough, the opinion or the way that we view these people. And when I was going through Lorraine Hansberry's Drinking Board play, which is not the play that I find I'm most attracted to. I'm more pulled by her play, What Are the Use of Flowers? Because it's a scene about an apocalyptic future, and what exists is only an older man and children who can't speak. But in the Drinking Gourd, it covers something very sociological, which is the nature of society as it transitions into, I guess, the Civil War, and dealing with the decline of the Cotton Kingdom as a working economy. And it's interesting to me, the nature of writing a play and how the author, Lorraine, is in constant battle with many components of the written play, which is to say the language, the sentence structure, grammar, how to describe character, things like that. And, even the characters themselves, the overseers, the slaves, the white man who, started his plantation and so on. But that's also to say, or it brings to my attention that I really should have, or I wish I had made the timeline in my mind correct, where I think Paul Robeson had done an enormous contribution to this thing about acting in plays, the theater, to present ideas and present philosophy. But I first was thinking about I started with Du Bois. And in that way, I wish I started with Du Bois and Robeson. But I started with Du Bois to say that there's something that people like Lorraine Hansberry, Nina Simone, James Baldwin, and August Wilson specifically pulls from Du Bois. And from Baldwin, is there a dealing with something else also, where you could see how Barbara Bullock, painters like Barbara Bullock would make sense, or even Marvin Gaye would make sense. But then I had to kind of stop myself before going ahead, because over the past month before we arrived at the preparing for the birthday, Doc's birthday, and the sociological and deindustrialization project, we did the music symposium. And ever since the music symposium, I was personally still trying to answer the question that we still haven't gotten to, which was the nature of revolutionary music in our time, as we face the question of hip hop, and we always talk about it. Well, what is its nature? Is it are we at a lost cause situation as it regards that? As it regards the problem of, a counter-revolutionary culture imposing itself on people. And so then I couldn't make the timeline just go from Du Bois and Robeson to Baldwin without skipping Sun Ra, because Sun Ra was born in 1914, though he had died in 1990 or around in the late 90s. But in some way, I found from the music symposium that I couldn't get rid of the idea in my mind that Sun Ra answers or was able to elevate a new understanding to our time, or somehow makes sense for now, in a way that I think the cultural workers or artists or whatever will have to deal with.
So,
Just in the
explain
relation,
that, explain
just in
that.
the relation of how he was. I don't want to use the word synthesizing because we're also talking about like the equipment synthesizers and stuff like that. But like he did bring together multiple aspects of sound
Okay.
that makes more things available now due to advancements in technology and also theoretical stuff. Okay, but then I sidetracked and I was like, oh, I remember when me and Doc watched that movie, the black and white movie with the woman and the man about the new like city metropolis,
Yeah, it was
Fountainhead.
yeah,
We watched
Fountainhead.
Fountainhead.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And I didn't remember the name of that movie, but then I was like, okay, that was during the time where we were trying to get into studying the modern periods of art. And, you know, Kathy, you remember that couple of free schools where we had gone through the history of different periods of, you know, the European Renaissance, you know, the Baroque period, and like all that kind of stuff made me remember also the presentation that you gave on the Da Vinci presentation. And I forget, I wish what the hell, I should have just brought it. But like, but the essay that Du Bois wrote on Da Vinci as being, what was that title?
The origins of modern science, of experimental science.
Well, that's the point of the essay, but the title of the essay, I forget. No, it was about.
Just the father of modern science.
Is that really the title of that?
Du Bois' essay.
Of Du Bois' essay? Okay,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. And then how we have, or, you know, Doc, your presentation, was saying what we're seeing already, are you seeing the point? Which is the point we had made about Du Bois being, a father of a new movement of world thought. And I thought that was interesting, sitting here trying to figure out how to organize my understanding, because of the one thing I had mentioned to Mary and Purva yesterday after we had done the interview with part 2 interview of Doc, was that in a way at the end of Du Bois's life, he joins the Communist Party, and he also, I was reminded, was attempting to write the Africana Encyclopedia. And so I would maybe suggest that Du Bois starts a New World movement of thought, and there's evidence of this through, the height of intelligence of these people, of Lorraine Hansberry, Nina Simone, August Wilson, and James Baldwin. But I would also suggest that there's something else that he had begun with that Africana Encyclopedia and his joining the Communist Party. And I could only assume that because of how Sun Ra, I could only assume that because of who Sun Ra was as an intellectual, and how he was trying to understand a new civilization as compared to, or in his study of African civilization or Egypt as a modern civilization. He was, so I wanted to start with that as like a skeleton that I begun to start to sketch in a little bit, because for me, when I come to free school for the first time, what's available are all these novels, and all these things that I can read by Baldwin and Moran and Du Bois, like The Quest of the Silver Fleets, the Black Flame Trilogy, Dark Princess, Jesus Christ in Texas, or The Comet. And with Lorraine Hansberry, the collection of Les Blancs, the raising in the sun, to be young, gifted, and black, or even Baldwin. And the reason, or the reason why Baldwin comes in the way, what is being figured out is, in the meanwhile, between Du Bois's intervention, historical and sociological and intellectual interventions, and then when he dies, something else also is being able to continue. That's just like a general skeleton. So I started to read the Leonardo da Vinci presentation that you gave at the library, and then I had a little conversation a little bit about that, because when you were talking about Du Bois, you had also asked the question of what makes the artist different from the experimental scientist. And you said the huge imagination. And that's where we're kind of getting this word imaginary a lot. But again, you had suggested that it is in the imaginary that seeks to understand the human in ways that just empirical science does not completely account for. And so Du Bois had, this is your words, Doc, had that imaginary to see or look into the future, to deal with the future. And then you had said that we were, okay, so, and then you had brought up the question about modernity, that at first is essentially European, but then after chattel slavery, modernity is no longer singular, singularly European. And so now the problem that modernity would solve is to rediscover or even discover what humanity is, what humanity is. And so that's the reason also why this whole Baldwin thing is kind of significant, or really significant, because when you say what is human, or you ask the question of what is human, it is past a certain point, to a certain extent, that the Black man is a human being.
Yeah.
And it also, because it also brings in the question of what makes us who we are. How do we understand, the like the dynamics of human consciousness and human feeling and the spiritual relationships, and like, what does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a man? What is sexuality? What is romance? What is love? Like, what is dreams? What is a child? Like, all these questions about the human being that are soon to be, or, striving to be answered. Or I will say that our, the Black freedom movement, and like that point about Martin Luther King and the quality of the movement, the purpose of it was to advance this country to be able to be a democracy. But it also insists on human beings to become something different. And so through that struggle, there is a definition of what human beings are beyond a racist or like, kind of system. And so I wrote that when we're dealing with the question of what is human, we are dealing with new technological and artistic tools to describe the way of life. We're talking about how poetry will develop language into a universal language, how sound will be felt for the first time, how sound will be felt, like we're talking in different dynamics, and that man will know his place in women and society will be made by all. And all definitions will be made true. Definitions of things that we believe are true will actually be realized and actually will be true. And time will pass because of the force of discipline, which is love, and nothing will wait against discipline. So history starts, then I had kind of went into categorizing the modern period because I'm asking again, like, did the West fall, like you had mentioned, Eddie, with World War II, or did civilization collapse in Europe with slavery, with chattel slavery? And then the periods between 1300 and 1500 also are covering the intellectual and philosophical, like, traditions of either Italy, France, Europe, like Germany, and there at the same time there's that development of capitalism and the slave system, and so these different periods, and I was like, wait, does the 1600, like, could I say that after 1500, would the next frame of time be between the 1600s to the 1900s, or the 1600s to the 1800s? And then why is it so short between the 1900s and the 2000s, which is to say the space of time where the revolutionary, where you can call it a revolutionary time between 1900 and 200. But then throughout this entire process of the modern period, there been revolution. The slaves were like, they did not want to be chattel slaves. They would be protesting. Like, so throughout this entire modern period, has there been revolution of the people? And then what came to me was these definitions of these words. So the colonial period began a modern time, and that's also coinciding coinciding the categorization of modern philosophy. But then to arrive at the present, there has been something between the modern moment, the making of the modern moment, and what's now. But like, in the general, you can't say what is now without understanding that there was a revolutionary struggle that emerged in that period between the rise and, I guess, fall of a general Europe and the rise of America, and then the making of America, or like what America could become. And I did get sidetracked with the Albert Einstein and Bohr point that you had made, where when you were making the Du Bois, or you're making the point that Du Bois is the father of the New World movement of thought, you were also considering the debate between Einstein and Bohr. And I think I need to revisit, like, kind of what that point you were making was, because you were noticing an epistemological break. But it's still an interesting point to me about time and things. Okay, so then I went back to what a timeline kind of could be, starting with Du Bois, and I didn't know how to kind of assess or associate King in relation to that, because what makes all of this movement that we call the Black Arts Movement? Is it Du Bois alone and all the sociology that was able to be done, Horace Clayton, Arthur Fawcett, all these people that we're looking at, and like the open, or is it because of the opening of knowledge itself, that the working out of the makings of a new human being was done by these extraordinary people? And so nobody really understands Nina Simone like that. Or at least if they do, then it becomes a cultural manifestation that is depoliticized in a way. Because she herself is almost right there with Marvin Gaye, the epitome of a political, artist. Mind you, how an artist can arrive at such a point, it really means a lot. It really means, a lot. And it says a lot to the nature of the people that I mentioned, that if in a closer look, we can see that it's the choices that these artists make that make art also. It's not, and it makes it even more profound than I think we have seen it before, or at least I'm feeling that way. Because, like I said, Lorraine Hansberry was dealing with ironies in different perspectives. Or, for example, with Nina Simone. So I had recently seen the documentary because, or I had forgotten to look up who wrote this documentary, but it was for class, and we were just trying to cover like a artist, and I picked Nina Simone, and I actually got really inspired because I had forgotten how much I loved her and how much I like sung her songs. I was like, wow, like I can't believe it that, I would want to call on that, kind of behavior because I'm proud to have done those songs, and I'm proud to stand in the legacy of a person so extraordinary. And so watching the documentary, yes, there's, kind of probably just different understanding. And later I will mention what the documentary title is, What Happened to Nina Simone or something like that. Yeah, maybe it's like the most generic documentary you could see about Nina Simone, and maybe they don't have everything right about her family, and they don't understand, why she was so mad and stuff like that. And they, the same also problem where she gets diagnosed in the later of her life as in the later periods of her life as being bipolar, but it still doesn't cover the commitment that she made to the revolutionary struggle and how it affects the person, because that means that she is in a place in society that is, you can't look back from that. You have to just keep going hands on the plow, And so, but the thing that I found very interesting about the documentary was the way that they mention, because they're overlooking the significance of her voice and of her playing. And so she always wanted to be a Black, classically appreciated, Black classical, pianist. And because, she was rejected from Curtis. Thank you guys. And she was only able to play, I forgot at what theater. No, she was playing and singing, but she always just wanted to play in the most respected theaters. And like that, and so she would play with one hand, harmonics, that she was comparing to the right hand. And the documentary didn't notice it, but I know I did. And I also know that piano, in my class, for instance, they would say, if women are being taught how to play piano, then you're being able to be raised, being taught how to be a good housewife or whatever, right? And so what's interesting about a woman playing the piano and then her revolutionary mind, her revolutionary spirit, her revolutionary dedication on top of it, it adds a huge body of work that would be theoretically studied in music if she was appreciated as she said she wanted to be, which is the classic, which I thought was such an interesting name. To be a part of the classic was like to study Greek and Aristotle, but if she wanted to suggest herself in that place in civilization, then that changes also the edifice of the association, like different understandings of music. And I think music could be furthered if people studied Nina Simone, or like others that I'll mention, especially Sun Ra, for instance. And like with the symposium, Mingus, there's just a lot to study.
Yeah.
So it's a wonder why. And part of the reason is because of the white world rejecting the revolutionary nature, and advancement of the revolutionary nature of the theoretical advancement, I should say, of these artists. And so her playing was something I find hugely significant. But then the reason why she began to sing was to support herself when her family was living in Atlantic City. And her voice is also something else, because the way she speaks, you could tell she's like being, so now in the description of her growing up, she really only studied the piano and went to school, but her life was around that studying of the piano.
Yeah.
And so that I kind of imagine, how a piano teacher back in like 1920, 30 would speak and sound like, whether it be like a New England accent or somebody who's trained in like over London or something like this. But like that affects the rhythm of the way that Nina speaks. But Nina's still a Black woman, so she's from South Carolina.
Say that one more time.
So she's from South Carolina.
Yeah, North Carolina.
North Carolina, but the Carolinas. But either way, so that voice is will show the qualities of an African voice.
Yes.
And I don't think the critics or the white world will be able to deal with that, because that means you would have to redefine definitions of what a woman's voice would sound like.
Yes, that's right. I agree with that.
Okay. But the reason why I went to Nina Simone is to talk about the nature of a political artist. And these three people, like, if we really study these people, or even four, because it's really kind of like August Wilson, Nina Simone, Baldwin, and Lorraine Hansberry that I can pull out of my head and say that we looked at to a certain extent. But like the qualities of their work is representative of like a working out of a number of theoretical questions. Like again, what is it to be a man? What is it to be relationships, even white, gay relationships, like all of these things that are bursting at the seams at that period of the height of the Black arts movement, or the 60s or whatever, which is also off of the back of the Black freedom movement, also off of the back of the defeat of Reconstruction, Du Bois, and so on. But like, so when we did this music symposium, and I was astounded by Sun Ra yet again, and, forcibly embarrassed by how disciplined he was, because I'm not as disciplined, or wasn't as disciplined as Sun Ra at the time that we did the music symposium. And I really had to get on my A game, because I feel better about myself. So like, Jesus Christ, like, you don't understand, like, it's really just trying to figure out the best way to make art out here. But so with Sun Ra, he has his book of like the immeasurable equation, which is like a book of his poetry. And the poetry is really, it would be interesting, suggestion to like look at, only because, or to understand how that language, or what he was trying to figure out, like it was, to me, more than music, but trying to really push humanity to another place, like another conscious understanding. And Sun Ra was convinced that also music would be able to maneuver or adjust maladjustments or evils and things like that. And like, I just looked again at the biography written by John Swade, just briefly, because I didn't read it enough. Because really what happened last night is that I spent my time reading like, what I had, wait. Where did I put it? Oh, I have to keep going. Reading, like, I started with Du Bois, The Quest of the Silver Fleece, and then I had read I'm forgetting something, in Dark Water, but the comment, drinking, and then I had looked at the drinking course, but I always really liked Jesus Christ in Texas. And maybe it was Of Work and Wealth. I forget. Before I had begun to read the presentation on Da Vinci, and then I got distracted by the 1889 conversation between Bohr and Einstein, because I thought that would make a good point. But that was entitled Discussions with Einstein on Epistemological Problems of Atomic Physics. But it only just brought up new questions for me that it's hard for me to like articulate completely. But I had meant to look at the biography with Sun Ra, but I've been like dragging my feet because I think Sun Ra is profound, and he sets a very high bar. And so he says, like, man has to rise above himself, transcend himself, because the way he is, he can only follow reproductions of ideas, because he's reproducing himself. Okay, he did not come, but what he was saying is that man needs to be able to rise above a reproductive system and move into a creative system.
Who was that?
This was Sun Ra. So Sun Ra was saying that man should rise above a reproductive system into a creative system. And I thought that word was very significant for the people in preschool, because I remember a couple months ago, Shanti, I had asked you, I was like, so what would you do in physics if like the whole cultural revolution like didn't happen, or counter-revolution like didn't happen, and like you were in a university, like, or even the example that you would give with if the Indira Gandhi, like whatever university, I forget, hadn't like been, because of the fall of the Soviet Union, like what would you do in physics? Like, would you answer the questions of Einstein? Like, would we, and so the point that Sun Ra made about a creative system means that really everybody in preschool should be working double time, because I know that, literature, stories, plays, science, art, everything, music can be advanced in a way. And it really means that there's a lot that we can create based off of the philosophy that we understand, which is always really fun. And I always wish that we could, but it never seems to be like a whole lot of time. So I kind of get, like why it's kind of hard, but it still like brings up the question: what's the difference between the artist and the empirical scientist?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it really has to do with the choices of life. And again, really the reason, or partially the reason why this topic had come up is because we had saw that play at Quintessence about called Fire, and it covered the cultural playwrights, kind of who coalesced around maybe Langston Hughes, like Wallace Thurman, or you had mentioned who is the Bohemian, Richard Bruce.
Yeah, Bruce.
And Gwendolyn Bennett and Zora Neale Hurston. And so that had brought up that question again about like this thing, what are artists to do to become or whatever. Anyway, so the reason why I had brought up the Africana encyclopedia point that Du Bois, had begun in his later in life is because Sun Ra had rearranged a lot of things. He suggested even reading the Bible backwards, and that Revelation came first and Genesis being last, and that he wasn't, he was not sure as to why people ignored Cush or Ham and, the darker peoples. But again, what comes up is this thing about Egypt, and he studied people like Sir E. Wallace Bridge, which, we probably had mentioned before in the biography, about the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which Sun Ra would call the Awakening, and that was about Osiris and the Egyptian resurrection, and how Osiris had been raised back to life from death by a ritual taught to Isis by the god of death, Thoth. So the Egyptians thought that the dead could be led down a path of eternity, and there's another philosophy here that. Or I would say a huge body of philosophy that Sun Ra was anticipating or was trying to work out. And Sun Ra had even taught himself the hieroglyphs, to read the inscriptions. And there's a number of I guess, what's the word? Esoteric knowledge.
The esoteric science.
It has a feeling of mysticism and esotericism or whatever, or maybe it has something to do with how anthropology doesn't ground itself in a particular historical, but there's something about the intellectual sphere that Sun Ra was taking in. And this is not to say, or not to make Sun Ra into a cultural, cultural Afrocentrist or anything like that, because really, if we get into Sun Ra, then we're also getting into the questions of physics, we're getting into questions of geometry, we're getting into questions of architecture, science, different levels of science. But for this point that I'm making, it's not really quite, I don't really need that. But for example, the Godfrey Higgins, the Anacalypsis, if I'm saying that right, an attempt to draw aside the veil of the Saitic Isis, or an inquiry into the origin of languages, nations, and religions. Within that, for example, Sun Ra would read that the world religions have the same source, and that Buddha was black, those kinds of things. Or The Children of the Sun by Archibald Rutledge. And I guess it was in David Livingstone's missionary travels and researches in South Africa that described to Sun Ra the nature of African villages, which were complete into themselves. And within that was a census that the John Swade noted, listed, doctors, blacksmiths, priests, carpenters, talking about a society that was modern. But if it's Egypt, then it's almost pre-modern. So Sun Ra is going pre-modern to understand what a modern society could look like. And so there's that kind of point that I want to make to anticipate something about our time today, or to answer the question that is on the table about the new human being and the new civilization. Because the basis of that search, I think, or that search right now for a futuristic definition of what the new human being would be for today, would begin with Sun Ra in a way. But I have to or I have to actually write that essay, or to be able to investigate Sun Ra in its complete sense, and then try and assert or be able to understand how Lorraine Hansberry, Baldwin, August Wilson, and Nina Simone were almost it kind of skipped them. It's not like Sun Ra's knowledge passed by them and they didn't know about that. But it's almost like what they were answering was something that Du Bois started, and then Sun Ra had kind of come out into something that Du Bois started, and then asked another question that has yet to be answered completely. And I don't really know what that kind of graph would look like, but it's not a straight timeline, I'll tell you that. But the other note that I wanted to make about Sun Ra to connect to later was that he had an independent record label called Saturn Records that he started in 1957. And the reason why that would be important is because one of the ways that artists can have freedom of art, of being able to creatively express themselves, is if they're independent. Which brings up the kind of question of today, because after Sun Ra, I'm like, well, we did study Bootsy Collins, but then there's people like Outkast, and if we look at the entire anthology of Outkast, which I did just incidentally, not recently, but just because it was coming up in my life, and I could kind of see how music was widened a lot by Sun Ra, and then in the midst of the counter-revolution, the artist is not, you know what I'm saying, just you can't categorize an artist. They're always actively thinking about stuff, unless they're completely principally and morally compromised, unless they're just, dealing with something else, which is kind of the problem that we're faced with today, I think, more so. But the reason why I had mentioned that group was to say, or bring up the question of hip hop, which we had brought up in a number of ways on the table here. And so the question about hip hop has something to do with bad frequencies, evil frequencies that manipulate feeling, that take away feeling. And when we're talking about mass culture, mass media, consumer culture, we're also considering how much does it cost, how are people, and I guess how people are affected by it. And the reason why those two things are most important is because we're dealing with reactions to culture, meaning, in different periods, I guess specifically of a counter-revolutionary culture, how did a generation take on ideas of, say, armed struggle, or say, who am I as a Black man? Am I what Snoop Dogg represents? Am I what Jay-Z or Beyonce represent? And so then you have to deal, and the reason why I bring up money, or the reason why I bring up industry, is to say that it is a system that we, in a way, have looked at in a number of documentaries of these jazz musicians, where you see white producers all of a sudden kind of making labels and being able to record, the musicians, and knowing about them, knowing all about the music. But then the music gets stifled, or like we're dealing with, so the problem of a counter-revolutionary culture is on the basis of an industry that is making a culture for a people to respond to, instead of artists who are voicing the needs of the people and are able to be in concert with the people. Like, the reason why the artists would not stand for the people is if they separate themselves from the people, which actively happens. And so drill music and all that stuff, when we were talking about it briefly, we have to investigate it from the standpoint of where is it coming from and who is supporting the music. And like, for real, like, who are the actors and what are their decisions? What are they deciding to do? For instance, the case on Young Dolph and Hernandez Govan, or even Yo Gotti, like Yo Gotti being a proponent or wanting to make business with Jay-Z is indicative of a cult or corporate manufacturing of like a fake music, number one, but like, and that has no interest for the people, and we can tell about that. But like, if a person like Young Dolph, who is an independent artist, and a part of his kind of like plan or of economic development was to buy land and then share the land within his family. And so that brings up a question that is well known: land and property. So if the artist is dealing with the problem of property, then it becomes an interesting phenomenon, because we're looking at how a people who have emerged from a counter-revolutionary culture is now figuring out how to support their families and navigate this moment, basically. I think that any artists that have freedom of thought would be riding a wave off of musicians that are coming out of the South, not because of the music itself, but because of these economic strategies that they are deriving or they are trying to act upon. Meaning, if there's independent artists that develop economic strategies to survive off of, then you're faced with two systems instead of just a big conglomerate of Sony, Disney, you know what I'm saying? Like the producers. And real reason as to why a Charles Mingus or whomever would be kind of confronted with the white world is because if you're economically independent and you're free of thinking, if you're free in the mind, then you're a danger to society and you're barely understood. That's not maybe the situation of Young Dolph, because, well, actually, I'll say it like this. You know, people will do one thing, but it'll be a sleight of hand kind of situation. I don't think that Young Dolph was like, you know, a bad, you know, thuggish personality. It doesn't seem like anybody who describes him sees him like that. So the image that he took up has to do with how he engages with that image. If I'm on a war, if we are in battle, you know, or maybe there's something that attracts him to that kind of, you know, to be able to defend, especially what he was trying to build. So the imagery would change also when the battle becomes a little bit different, but I'll say that the only reason why I mention that is because he doesn't look like whom we have studied before, like a Marvin Gaye or somebody who hasn't dealt with the cultural changes of the past 25 years that we've experienced. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that he couldn't have, ignored the chains, ignored the car, ignored the teeth, ignored the, all that stuff. But what he was trying to represent, that's part of what makes it, that's where the space opens up a little bit to explain what I'm trying to explain is like, I don't even think he was a thug. Like, I don't even think.
Well, see, this is the question.
Right.
Let me ask, could I may I,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, thank you so much. I mean, so comprehensive and so many parts. It's, the only thing I wish is that two people were here, my brother and my friend Wardell O'Connor.
Oh my gosh.
And I have to tell you, you reminded me today so much of my brother. And I know both of them were musical people, both were into singing and opera and the Black voice. And they would have been amazed. By the way, my brother talks a lot like you. I mean,
Scatterbrained or something?
well, not that way. I mean, just, I'm just sorry you never met him. You would really have enjoyed him, and he would have enjoyed you. And I know Wardell would have enjoyed you. We talked, he and I talked about your voice.
This is not even talking about the singers and stuff like that. This
No, but
not completely.
could I just say?
I'm sorry, yeah.
No,
If
no,
this is really
no,
the
no.
question, say it.
No, if you don't mind, really, thank you. I think it was a brilliant presentation and very comprehensive. And it is I think among other things, you talk about a philosophy of art that is comprehensive in the civilizational sense of rebuilding a people from a counter-revolution and a system that ruins the human being. And I think the people that you mentioned, Wilson and Nina Simone and such, and Lorraine Hansberry and Baldwin, I think it's very important. But I also think that the way you dealt with Nina Simone of the piano and the voice, and her desire to be a classical pianist, that was blocked. So she creates something completely new of the blues and the classical chords,
And the struggle song.
and struggle and revolutionary. And she identified as a revolutionary. What I'd like to ask you, by the way, I have to ask you this. Dwight and I went to a conference at Lincoln last Wednesday. And there was a panel where one of the panelists, a professor at Temple University, gave a presentation on Kendrick Lamar. And he made a case that after Kendrick Lamar, you don't need Shakespeare or Beethoven. And we, said, well, you didn't mention, I guess, does Kendrick Lamar supersede Baldwin or Lorraine Hansberry or Amiri Barak and so on and so forth. But he was saying that what authorizes or gives credibility in the larger civilizational sense to Kendrick Lamar is that he's been given Grammys, 2 Grammys, a Pulitzer, and he headlined the Super Bowl halftime show. Yeah, right. And I think, and I'd like to ask you, because, some of the more recent rappers, I know you mentioned Outkast, I'm familiar with him and them, but the others, I'm just interested, well, I'll just ask you straight out. Is hip hop a corporate culture and thus a counter-revolutionary culture? is there an oppositional trend within hip hop that is not yet revolutionary but challenges corporatism and the mainstream, and thus Kendrick Lamar? I'm certain there must be.
And I would also say that a part of the counter, a part of that counter to the corporate media
Right.
is really not even just hip hop, but the way that musicians from the South or Black musicians, period, could actually play instruments and, like, not rely on just electronic.
So you're saying, can I
But
ask you-
there's trends. It's just trends.
So let me ask you this question then. And then we have to go to I want to, if you don't mind, are you saying, is it your opinion, because you invoked Marvin Gaye and Nina Simone literally together, is that, and then you went to the Southern rappers, the Southern hip hop artists, and strategies to feed their families, or economic strategies?
I'm trying to articulate that, yeah.
Huh?
I'm trying to articulate what that means.
Yeah. Can they go forward without going back?
That's the thing. But like when you had sent me the woman Samara Joy.
The what?
The woman the singer Samara Joy.
Yeah,
And how she
Samara Joy, yes,
And how she sings Sarah Vaughan.
yes.
I think the freedom that she will have, will be because of this struggle between something corporate and something different.
Explain.
But I also think that both need to be politically conscious, or like both need to be that, transparently conscious. But or at least being able to make political and freedom music, make a new way of music,
Let me ask you another question. Yeah, I hear
But
you.
that has not yet.
It's not been realized.
But it can.
It can
I think
be.
that the striving is to, and that the artists that are the hip hop or in the Southern would have to go back, and they, I think, are surrounded by that music.
In other words, they can't be unmindful of Samara Joy. They have, if they are to be revolutionary, and Samara Joy is this great singer. She's in, the Sarah
I think they
Vaughan.
probably would know about each other.
Yeah, I know Jeremiah and Emily and some other people went to United House of Prayer for All People. I had a brief conversation with Emily about it. Of course, with Jeremiah. Emily said the way they were playing was the best music she ever heard.
Yeah,
Is that-
that's accurate.
So here, we have this whole corporate thing, and here we have these people down in South Philly in a religious institution
Still singing.
playing trombones and tubas and I don't know what other instruments. And Emily said, but Emily said it was the best music she's ever heard, the most inspiring music she's ever heard. And so, you know what I'm asking, in the social context that we live in, let's say of the Black proletariat and its imaginary, I think Emily and Jeremiah would say, once you hear that, how do you go back to even Kendrick Lamar?
And see, this is the part of the problem, because
Okay.
the women who raise their kids will listen to or all Your Smile, Teddy, and all, even the church songs, the
Yes.
Clark sisters. That's what they're listening to, and really it comes to another problem that I'm thinking about is really about the Black family and how Black men and Black women relate to each other. And after this period, that bringing together of that family will be important in that question of like.
You say that family, why?
Only because.
1 minute, bro, 1 minute.
Only because.
Why not that community?
Well,
Why
well,
the,
yeah.
because,
I agree with that.
isn't the nuclear family more problematic, although it might be necessary? Isn't it more problematic than the community?
I agree with you. I think it is. I think it's, yes. That's the way
And
it's
so the question is, the first question is, does it inspire, we talked about the Million Man March, does it inspire a spirit of the Million Man March? And is there, quote, music? And I asked TJ about this, he wasn't quite certain. Is Kendrick Lamar going in his music in the opposite direction of the spirit of the Million Man March, and what they experience down at the United House of Prayer more in line with the spirit of the Million Man March? Is a corporate culture, black or white, is it so destructive of community that it is useless? And just my last point, Dwight and I were at this conference at Lincoln, our alma mater, that we love, but that we're very disappointed in. And I was, and some of you all have been there already. I was emotionally exhausted because you hear people talking and say, ain't nobody gonna challenge. Is there an opposite position? Is there not something more than you just saying things? And then it occurred to me that and Dwight and I were going over some of Kendrick Lamar's lyrics on the phone. We're talking, he was saying it, and it is almost like nonsense parading as profoundness. It's like, how you would remember more than me, when you were 12 years old and you wanted to talk to one of your girlfriends in ways that your parents wouldn't know what you were saying. You would talk in circles, and that's what I found it was. I found it to be, if I'm wrong, please correct. Just 1 second. 1 second. I found it to be so obscurantist, so without inspiration, without anything to uplift. I know, Emily said to me, and she didn't grow up in any religion at all. She said the music brought tears to her eyes because here for the first time, I guess for her generation, was music that uplifted her. And Jerry, can I say what you told me, Jerry?
Sure.
Jerry, who comes up out of the Presbyterian Church, parents in the ministry, he said for the first time in years, he felt he had a religious experience there, which means an uplifting experience. So that's what I'm saying, Yeah, I don't know. You hear where I'm coming from. And
I'm not sure, but I know that it has to be figured out.
Yeah.
And I think that road is difficult.
Say that again.
I think that the road is not.
Right.
But I know that it has to be figured out. And I believe in the music that is real music. So. But just 1 second. I'm sorry.
1 second.
Sorry. Yeah. But no, I hear you. It's just, the difficult of this phase and then moving into
I agree with that. Yeah.
It's not, I don't know how much of a clean slate it would be, but I know that all people are struggling towards a new music. I think I would even go with not even just the Black artists that are coming out of the South, but the Mexican artists. I think that the artists out of India. I think it's very apparent that people are looking for a broader understanding about because it's just been too much that has happened. Too much has happened to music. Like you had also, maybe last year, shown all these people over in Europe or whomever it was, even the Russian singers, singing Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Yeah, right,
And like all these things. How? Why? But why? And where will things go?
Yes. Just ask, you say all people are striving for new music.
I think so.
Uh-huh. And what is the evidence that you would present for that claim?
How in circles of the, I guess, coming out of the South, I'm noticing people playing guitars in addition to the line dancing. How when you were talking about Samara Joy, it was not a white person replicating Sarah Vaughan, but a Black woman replicating Sarah Vaughan, even if she, I don't know, is committed to the struggle or not. I don't really know that about her. Or even the woman that I had sent you from Philly. I think there's a lot of artists that are not mainstream, but represent a new frequency. I'm sorry if I'm making this too long, but the last thing about the presentation, the only reason why I chose writers was to talk about the movement of ideas.
Yeah.
And how the writers are essentially kind of dealing with that. But anyway. Oh my God. Okay, cool.
I'll just quickly read comments because I know we need to
Get up out of here. I'm sorry.
M Spark said they're a big fan of Nina Simone. MJ and M Sparks had a back and forth about Gen Zs. MJ was saying, yes, Gen Zs are powerful, and this explains how we can funnel creative power into everyday life, and that would boost productivity in this question for the future. And then M Sparks says, Gen Z is no smarter than any other American propaganda is poisoned people. There is poison from prior generations. However, they do have amazing tools at their disposal with technology advancements and developments. And then, let's see, technology might be smart, but the masses of people remain dumb, question mark. MJ asked, any creatives in the chat? I'm a creative artist / producer. This explains how authentic artists like us are ganged up on because we're producing positive frequency versus today's pornographic music. Drill music and sex music is coming from these puppet labels and demonic corporations. John Jay asked, how or why are non-Black people speaking on Black culture? JD Enfield said, hip-hop is a lumpen proletarian cultural art form and a corporate commodity. Brick Griff said, I can't stick around today, but I saw some of your recent recordings and I think you're awesome. I hope to become a regular collaborator in your community at large. I'm artistically inclined, but I earn fiat via technology.
You earn what?
Money. Brick Griff also said, the Million Man March would look radically different today. I'd honestly say they're both relatively welcome. I don't know what the both is in reference to, but neither is representative. Jahan said, one musical phenomenon I've seen in person and on video is in Chicago, St. Louis, and New Orleans, is older Black musicians leading groups of younger non-Black musicians in jazz, blues, and R&B. I wonder if this shows a new grassroots phenomenon in deindustrialized America, where the masses are embracing the Black musical tradition in unique ways. And then Brick Griff responded to that and said, industrialization is akin to colonization, so I hope so, as long as it's not AI generated. I feel like we should continue this conversation, I think, because even from the comments, you can tell that there are very high stakes involved in the future, in even understanding like what is quote representative of Black people and what is for humanity and for the future. And I feel like in a lot of ways it basically is a question of life or death, and
it is,
and it has to be actually discussed, I think, on those.
I think the gentleman Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was saying like Dead Red.
Speak up just a little bit.
Leftist, like radical, but I mean, there's like sometimes like say like underground like Boots Riley, like 10 million ways to kill a CEO. They're gonna feel that thing, you know. And then like and then there's like more kind of underground like there in like the early 2000s like Immortal Technique and like Sunshine.
Yeah, that was one generation.
Sunshine was like
I couldn't understand.
He's talking about like the musicians Death Prez or Immortal Technique.
Right.
And that generation of music.
And shoot, I don't
So
know.
opera suggestion.
Or everybody who does is like very kind of
I couldn't understand.
Erica Badu.
Erica Badu, yes.
Possible, but.
I think like Nuri said, we have to continue this. This is a very important area. And we have to, consider Dead Prez and even Public Enemy and of course Erica Badu.
Before we end, we just wanted to re-announce.
We're gonna announce
As people may know, we're holding a celebration of none other than Tony Montero's 80th birthday on October 31st and November 1st here at the Church of the Crucifixion. And we want it to be a celebration of him, but also of the life world that produced an Anthony Montero and which produces revolutionaries. And so the event is titled again, Our Beautiful and Beloved Struggle, celebrating Anthony Montero's 80th birthday. And so on Friday, October 31st, which is Doc's birthday, we're gonna have something experimental for the free school, but Emily is kind of organizing it, but it's like a pageant titled A Native Son of Philadelphia, which will feature musical performances, dramatic performances, poetry, dramatic readings, testimonials. So that's October 31st in the evening. And then November 1st, Saturday, all day here at the Church of the Crucifixion, we'll have a series of roundtables and panels. The first roundtable is titled America's War on Civilization Demands Intercivilizational Unity of the People. And then we'll have another panel titled The Rediscovery of W.E.B. Du Bois, A Black Swan. And then we'll have a roundtable again titled Message to the Messengers, inspired by Gil Scott Heron, to build a new civilization. And then we'll end on Saturday evening with an R&B dance party. So that's the current program, and we'll work out more in the next 2 weeks.
Is there a GoFundMe yet?
There's a GoFundMe that will be launched imminently.
Can you turn off the live stream?
Yeah. What? Oh, yeah. Okay, so we're going to end now, and yeah, thanks to all the commenters.
Yeah, thanks to all the commenters. The comments have been very exciting the last 2 weeks, and it's nice seeing new commenters also.
Emily said that she was at Independence Hall.
Yeah, we should walk up there.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Right?